Good morning. I now call the February 26th, 2021 workshop session of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education to order. I will now entertain a motion to adopt the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion from Carol Sawyer, second from Lenora Shipp. All those in favor, if you're in the room, please raise your hands. And if you're on Zoom, please say aye.
Aye. This is
Okay,
Ms. G.
so that passes by, let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 0, Madam Clerk. We have 3 board members that are delayed due to traffic, so they should be here momentarily. Okay, so Madam Clerk, the agenda is adopted by a unanimous vote of 6 to 0. Mr. Superintendent, I yield the floor to you to begin our budget workshop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. Good morning, board members. Happy Friday to each of you all. I want to thank you for this opportunity to continue our discussions of budget priorities for the 2021-2022 school year. We want to spend most of our time in this workshop collaborating, so I will keep my comments very brief. What we share today follows our discussion of a few weeks ago and will inform the recommendations we make at the March 23rd Board of Education meeting. We arrive at budget development this year in the second school year impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. We must acknowledge that our work this year has to be viewed through the lens of the pandemic's impact. We have a strategic plan that guides every decision we make during the budget process, and that is true this year as in years past. That strategic plan is in place to address challenges that existed before COVID. Those challenges have deepened during and because of the pandemic, and we know that all our lives have been changed by the effects of COVID. School certainly is one of those areas where the pandemic's impact is most visible. We will not run from the challenges that predated COVID, and now, in some cases, and even more significant, we must not and we will not turn away from providing equitable outcomes for all students and families we serve. And we will support our teachers and staff as they do the hard work necessary to enable college and career readiness for our students. This budget and our discussion in this development demonstrate what we need based on what we know and can reasonably predict for the near future. It is true that there are some temporary funds available from federal and state sources that will help us begin to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19 and impact our ability to educate our students. And we emphasize temporary. And we point back to the strategic plan that predates the pandemic. Those challenges are deeper. The hill our staff must climb to bring students forward with growth and development is higher than it was before. So these temporary funds are helpful, they are necessary, they are critical in the short term. But our focus is long term. On outcomes for students, we cannot afford to say that because of one-time funds, we can reduce existing funds. Needs existed before COVID. Needs will exist when, hopefully sooner rather than later, the pandemic is not a dominant force in our lives. So I want to thank you all once again for the opportunity to work together to develop a budget that puts students and staff first. It is not easy work, but it is critical. With that, I am going to toss the ball over to our Chief Financial Officer, Sheila Shirley.
Good morning. Good morning. Mike. There you go.
Good morning. I am Sheila Shirley, and we appreciate everyone convening this morning on a nice Friday morning. We are going to jump right into our work session today. As the superintendent mentioned, we really want this to be a time of collaboration because this is, our effort to try to respond to the board's request that we have you all involved sooner in the process. And so today, our goal is to review the context of the strategic planning and the budget process based on where we stand today. We want to deepen the understanding of the emerging strategies that we have identified that will address the needs and provide feedback we'd like for you to provide feedback on these potential investments as we move forward to advance the strategy. I do want to emphasize, as I said, we are in the midst of this process. This budget is not complete. I think someone used the baking the cake analogy earlier, so you all are seeing all of the nastiness and the flour flying and the ingredients being put together. And I would liken that to the fact of today's session is about examining the ingredients that we are considering to bring our cake to completion. I do want to just mention that there is significant uncertainty in a lot of the key budget drivers that we're trying to develop a budget around. Primarily, as you all know, the state and local components of our budget represent the most significant funding streams typically, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and I'm sure you've been watching that, because folks don't really know how to predict what the impact long-term of the COVID pandemic will have on revenues. Enrollment projections are equally uncertain. You all know that our enrollment for the current year is down. But what will that look like next year? So we're in the process of trying to determine that. We do expect that there may be a decline, but that is unpredictable and not known at this time. We've also not gotten any direct guidance as of yet from the state on what salary and benefit increases would look like. And that may not seem like the only thing, but it is certainly a very key thing and an important and weighty budgetary impact for us as we design a budget. There are a few things that we do know, though, and the superintendent touched on some of them. First and foremost, we know that there's going to be significant unfinished instruction for our students and that we have work to do in order to address that. He spoke to the COVID response funding that and talked about how it is one-time funding. It is, and the way I have described it to my colleagues is that I see this as funds that are available to provide that infusion and that intensive support for a very short period of time, over the next couple of years. The current funding that we had received for COVID response under the CARES Act and from the state in the Coronavirus Relief Fund, also from CARES Act, both of those buckets of funding, I would anticipate that we will likely expend before the end of this fiscal year. So the COVID response funding that we're speaking of for next budget year would be the next installment, and it's called I'm going to read it because I can't ever remember the words, Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations. You will hear me call it CRRSA. I've nicknamed her. CRRSA, C-R-R-S-A. And we're expecting $141.9 million that will be available until September of 2023, and we are anticipating that we will have those allocations from the state by late spring. There's additional federal funding that could be coming, but the timing and the amount of that is uncertain, of course, from the federal level. I want to emphasize some of what the superintendent mentioned again, but that we must be strategic in the use of these funds. We obviously have to comply with all the rules and regulations and the purpose of those funds. We want to be very cognizant and recognize that they are one-time funds and available until September of 23. And we want to make sure that we are using those in a, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I thought they were talking to me.
No.
That we should use these funds for a short-term infusion of intensive support for our students, our staff, and our facility needs. And we really need to ensure that we minimize the risk of a significant funding cliff as we approach the end of that period. So I will just say in closing that the final budget proposal will reflect a purposeful alignment of our resources to our most appropriate funding sources. But the first work that we must complete is getting feedback from you about the investments that we will include in that budget proposal that you will eventually see in late March. I'm going to now turn it back to the superintendent. Yeah, back to the superintendent.
Thank you, Ms. Shirley. So in addition to the needs that we know we have, this budget, as you heard, is designed to address our needs coming out of a pandemic. And we're developing that response, one, to accelerate the learning. So in our response, we must address these three critical questions. How will we support all students? And how will we support teachers so that they can support all students? And how will we bridge the gap and accelerate learning? And our Chief Academic Officer, Brian Kingsley, will talk a little bit more about that shortly. But our response has to meet all students' needs, and those needs are so varied. So what have our students experienced? We know that there are some students who thrive in a virtual environment. They experience very little unfinished learning and have actually seen gains. We know this is something that works well for them. Then there are some students who were able to engage in a virtual environment, but they struggled. And they have some unfinished learning. This wasn't just a normal year for those students. And then there are other students for whom the virtual environment has not worked as well, and they have had huge struggles. And they weren't able to access their education in the way that we had hoped. So they have some significant unfinished learning. Now, we know that addressing the needs of all of our students across the continuum of experiences will require, bless you, will require that we meet the needs of our teachers as well. And so our response is geared toward building the capacity of our teachers to do this important work. And so with that, I am going to toss it over to Mr. Kingsley to talk about our summer learning plans.
Thank you, sir, and good morning, everybody. It's really nice to be with all of you today. As our superintendent articulated, we must create a response that meets this moment. And while we will begin today, this morning, to begin talking about summer programming, what we do right now matters. And so while we will be talking a little bit in detail about what our process is to begin building robust summer programming, a precondition to having highly effective summer programming is that we finish this year incredibly strong. And I just want to make sure that we name that as we think about the work that we're embarking upon. Right now, we are in search of multiple stakeholder feedback, and you being a critical group in this process. As we know, I think February 15th, we had House Bill 82 that was introduced by the Speaker of the House, and I believe that has since moved from the House over to the floor of the Senate. But our planning and programming and thoughts around this particular work had begun prior to that. We want to make sure at a minimum we meet the minimum expectation of robust summer programming that would allude to at least 6 weeks of programming for our students. But we want to make sure that what we're bringing forth today, is representative of feedback from other constituents, both internally and external to the system, which has been really valuable to all of us. Forgive me my back, I just want to make sure some of the things that we've learned that matter, and we're just kind of generalizing the feedback across trends here, but we want to make sure people are very interested that we're doing this safely. So we do anticipate all of the protocols that we're currently administering regarding COVID-19 will continue to be in place over the course of the summer. But our families and our community members are very interested in this being a social and joyful experience, not just something that is robotic in nature, that is strictly academic. And so it will need to be enriching in every sense of the word, and we're excited about building those particular programs. We've heard from our community that we want to make sure that these programs are inclusive, that they're culturally responsive, and again, go above and beyond the call for what we know we must address in terms of unfinished instruction, but we also ensure that we infuse the arts and physical education and music into these programs to give the full suite of experiences that some of our students haven't had that full taste as a result of the reliance on remote learning due to safety protocols. We also know that we've heard from our Superintendent's Teacher Advisory Council that as we think about, and we're going to ask you a really probing, thoughtful question at the end of this slide deck, that we want to make sure that we're trying to be mindful of teacher burnout as we're thinking about this work, knowing our teachers are learning every single day how to continue to be agile and navigate various modalities of teaching and learning. And so they are looking for something that's very flexible, but also incentivizing for them to honor their work as well as other employees that may be involved. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So as we think about, you've heard our district begin to utilize the term unfinished instruction, and we're using that on purpose with the intentionality of not problematizing our students or problematizing our teachers as a result of the experiences that none of us had any choice in the matter as a result of what happened on March 13th of last year. And as we think about what unfinished instruction is, it's experiences that fail to provide the opportunities either for learning or instruction for students to show proficiency. We know that's a very real thing that is to no fault of many of our teachers or our students. And so really getting clear on what that looks like over the course of now through the remainder of this year for all of our students, and thinking of it through a strengths-based mindset. What do our students know how to do? What have they mastered? And how do we communicate that broadly with our parents will matter. What's really important as we think about this particular information that's on this slide, while we need to be intentional about building programming for all students, this is not about just students that are at risk. All students have been impacted by unfinished instruction in some shape or form, but we need to get clear on what is the unfinished instruction that we're trying to solve for. Who do we determine needs this unfinished instruction, and how do we engage them thoughtfully over the course of now and the remainder of the year and into the summer? And what are some of the conditions as we build this program together? What are some of the things that we want to hold tight to? We know House Bill 82 kind of outlines some of the things that make sure that we are, as a minimum, are providing 6 weeks of programming for 5 hours a day, that if students do participate, that we should be utilizing that information, their participation and their performance in the programming to reevaluate any decisions regarding retention. And we do know that the current legislation has a stipulation around kindergarten students that if they are on track to be retained but do participate in a summer program, that they would be promoted. But that is only specific to kindergarten students. Our principals are asked to reconsider and reassess other students. But again, this programming, as we're beginning to build out the potential logistics for this, while we will prioritize at-risk students, we also know that there are many other students in our district that would benefit from participating in such programming. As we're thinking about, and I apologize, it's hard, but I just want to make sure I'm on track here. As we're participating with, collaborating with each other and thinking about how this plays out, we want to make sure that we're prioritizing, not just as I shared with you earlier, the academic programming, but also the wraparound supports, the social emotional learning, the school counselors, the psychologists, the social workers that we know. In many instances, we're continuing to reorient students to our buildings, and some maybe our buildings for the very first time. We want to go big. And I say that with huge emphasis, that we want to make sure while we're prioritizing all grade bands, it's also important that we have an incredible focus on our primary grades specific to early foundational skills for literacy and reading comprehension, and do that work in partnership with our community. But we also will need to continue to identify opportunities for unfinished instruction for mathematics, science, and other enrichment areas. It's important to note, as you see here, these grade bands are inclusive of all students, and we're not creating separate standalone programs For students with exceptionalities or English language learners, we want to make sure that we are inclusive in our approach, but also making sure that students that have very specific and unique needs, that they also have programming available to them. And that shows up differently for students that may need, specific recovery activities, other students that already, through their identified individual education plan, have extended time and opportunities where we may, as a system, as a result of remote learning, may need to provide some form of compensatory services to various students and parents across the district, and we want to utilize our summer programming to be able to do that. We also want to be incredibly intentional. All subgroups are at risk in this current space, but as we evaluate our English language learners and the role of newcomers in our system right now, really doubling down on an effort in a specific programming for them is going to be another priority. And I skipped over high school, and I didn't do that intentionally, but also making sure that as we identify students that are not on the appropriate trajectory to graduate on time, that we're prioritizing them for credit recovery and opportunities to retake courses if they so choose, based upon existing policy that supports that type of effort. As I shared with you earlier, continuing to make sure that we equip families between now and the end of the year, not just what programs we may be offering, but with specific information around what their children know and can do, is going to be incredibly important. We are right now prototyping a type of progress report to be able to provide to our families through grades kindergarten through grade 8 that would be a companion to the report card, to provide them an extra level of detail to the specific skills, both academic as well as social emotional, that children have been able to master and show strength in, that allows us to build very specific and laser-focused programming in our summer. It also will equip our principals with enough information to master schedule next year in a very specific and inclusive way. And so we're trying to make sure that we continue to meet the timelines to do that by the end of the fourth quarter. While we're not officially branding our summer programming as a fifth quarter, because that may have a negative connotation to it to some, but the idea of thinking about the 57 days that we do have available to us in the summer is really thinking about summer programming differently than how our mindsets and values and beliefs may have somewhat kind of thought about this in prior years. This has to be an extension of this school year and almost a bridge to next school year. And so while there will be joy built into the culture in the center of each of these programs, going deep on the academic programming and making sure that we're bringing back our best and brightest teachers and staff to be able to offer this is going to be incredibly important. And this summer seems to be a little bit longer than usual. It's almost 3 months. And so really taking full advantage of the time that we have will be very, very important. As you've read probably in the draft policy, there is no additional state funding that is coming with this expectation that may be passed in the near future around implementing this programming. So our district, in partnership with our chief financial officer, as well as all of you, will need to identify other resources to be able to offer this program, whether that's federal stimulus dollars, other dollars that are traditionally provided for Read to Achieve camps, those particular things, but we will need to identify other types of funding sources in order to make this program go. At a high level, other conditions that we are considering at this time, and I shared with you some of this already, and I won't go too deep here, is that, again, making sure that the full suite of services that are needed, especially during a pandemic, are continuing to be available and present for all of our students and our families. And that includes our counselors and social workers. We'll know we need technology coordinators. A full suite of wraparound supports will need to be there. We're going to need to identify flexible ways to bring back our teachers. We want to make sure that high-quality teachers are being compensated, as well as instructional assistants for their work. And we want to make sure, as we're thinking about this work in partnership with our community partners, that we're doing this with consistency and quality. That will require reliance upon our district-created and district-procured resources across all of those programs. And we've had really thoughtful partnerships with our community to be able to do that, as well as develop them alongside of our teachers and how to use those with integrity. We also know that we have to measure impact. We can't just offer 6 weeks of programs and not know if we move the needle. So making sure that we get clear in those progress reports before the end of the year to ensure where we started as a baseline and know what the actual impact was on our students and our faculty as a result of providing a heavy investment in summer programming matters to everybody involved, both our system and the community. And so we need to make sure that we're very clear around what that looks like prior to starting the program. Also know that we have a tutoring effort. You've heard me talk just this past Tuesday around our partnership with the North Carolina Education Education Corps, where we will have an opportunity to provision tutors to work with our HELPS tutoring partner to offer services up to 700 students. That's in partnership with various other efforts that we're trying to streamline, so we're all approaching building literacy and foundational skills in a synonymous way using the same resources. And Reed Charlotte, Freedom Schools, the YMCA, there's been so many partners that have been really thoughtful in coming to the table and wanting to link arms and do that with us together and not these standalone siloed manner that may have existed in prior years a long time ago. So that's important to note. And I'll share with you this finally is our next steps and a couple questions here, is that we know we need to make sure that we are targeting students. As I shared with you earlier, we know who we have as at-risk students, but there are students that may not be captured in a traditional data set that we know that we need to offer these particular programs to be able to gauge how much this is going to cost us to build out all of the logistics. We are going to begin engaging our families in the next few weeks by asking them to consider pre-registering for the program so we can get really clear on the types of numbers we'll see across all of our schools. We want to be able to offer these types of programs across all schools, but we know that we have to deal with some of the constraints that we have many schools that are geared for deep renovations over the course of the summer, and dealing with the complexities to be able to offer access and transportation to neighboring schools will be a high priority. Also prioritizing the use of our district technology. Many of our technology that's been distributed to students has been in their hands since last March. We're going to need to make sure that we're thoughtful around making sure all of that is high functioning and appropriately working, as well as exploring employee compensation, curriculum, making sure that this aligns well with summer athletics and other schedules for year-round students or year-round schools, as well as our district prior policies around having 4-day work weeks and beginning to explore whether this begins to offset how we think about that in short order. So those are decisions that are on the horizon. I do have 2 questions that I'd love to engage you with today. Maybe if we can get to both of them, great. If not, at least the first one from a workshop perspective. But really curious, as you had an opportunity to listen to a little bit of this today, if you have any other ideas or suggestions that would make summer programming more engaging or more robust, I'd love to hear that, as well as if you've heard things that we haven't yet considered or talked about this morning that you think are mission critical to our planning. We'd love to hear your feedback on that as well. And if you have any thoughts, as I know that you're incredibly communicative with our faculty members and our teachers, to be incredibly mindful of knowing what they're in a pandemic too. And while we're going to be incredibly responsive to our students, we want to make sure that we're doing that in a way that's mindful of what they need to not just do great service this summer, but to ensure we hit the ground running next year as well. So at that, I'll hit pause and open up for feedback and dialogue, if that's okay.
And we have, just a time check, we have 10 minutes scheduled for this section of questions. We have a lot more to get through before 11 o'clock, and we're actually running a bit over already. And so with that, for sure, share your feedback if you have it. If you want to say pass, that's fine. And I'll start with you, Ms. Shipp, and come around.
Okay. I think you've done a great job with talking about the programs that we have had and we can continue to use. And I think that's very important. I would just continue to add that we take a look at how those programs strongly connect, like Y Reader was so tremendous, and having teachers that are the most experienced, and I think you mentioned that, working even with the Y Reader program, working with your Freedom School programs, that's critical to how you move students and engage students. Those activities, and they have additional activities that are engaging in Y Reader beyond just doing the reading. They were involved in also swimming, which was something a lot of our students needed. And so I think that's critical to engaging them and also being robust. I think one of the things I didn't hear you talk much about was how do we look at our students that need to continue to be accelerated, that have lost some learning on the high end. And I think, and a lot of times we need to do that. Not only do we remediate and look at those that need more, but we also need to be looking at how we accelerate doing this type of program. And I think that's critical because there's loss also with those students. So I think we need to bring them into the summer program as well and make sure we are stretching them and catching them because some of them have some gaps right now. And I also didn't hear you talk too much about, although I know you probably have this already infused in it, but what programs are you using in the summer? For example, Study Island, A to Z, Raz Kids, Dreambox, and there's so many others that are really good, and it starts kids where they are, and it takes them on that trajectory to go where they need to go, especially with the Study Island and some of these other programs that we also used in conjunction with some of the programs I know we already have for summer school or for this summer learning. And I'm very concerned that we make sure there's a strong focus on reading because we know that there's reading loss. So my biggest concern is that we are intentional and purposeful about reading, 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 reading. That we are looking at the reading foundation, we're looking at reading comprehension, we're looking at reading fluency. And this is all the way through, as you know, our high school students, not just our kindergartners. And you talked about a little bit retention and K. I think we need to look at K in first grade because first grade is also reading readiness. That's where we look at, okay, have they jumped off to start reading by the end of first grade? So I think we really got to look at K in 1. And what's going on as we finish the year, how much we're doing to close those gaps with those kindergartners that lost learning back in March, right? And then they're first graders, and where are they at this year? So I think we really got to look at not just K, but
Ms.
also
Schiff?
the first grade.
Just a reminder, we have 10
Okay, and
minutes
I'm through.
total for
I'm
all of
in
us.
this.
You
That's
good?
it.
Okay. Did you need him to respond or just sort of take notes on the feedback?
Well, I don't, did you?
Okay. Mr. Strain?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to build on my friend and colleague's remarks. I think that one of the most critical challenges we have is assessment. As Ms. Shipp said, it's going to be really important to identify where each individual student is because certainly every individual has been impacted in different ways by both the pandemic and by the modality that we have selected. And so and that the families have selected as well. And so the assessment and identification of where they are regarding content mastery against the expectations for that grade level. I often talk, as you know, we have lots of these conversations about meeting children where they are. We have to identify what that is and how that assessment takes place because obviously the standardized tests have been very difficult since last year. We've got grades now that we're discussing about how we grade and what that means and all that sort of stuff. At the end of the day, that doesn't change the fact that we've got to assess where kids are, how to meet them at that point, and give them every opportunity to grow. That fundamental issue hasn't changed. I think the biggest challenge is how we do those assessments. So I look forward to hearing more about that and then tailoring individualized plans to meet the needs of each child where they are. Thank you.
Ms. De La Hara?
Thank you. So in thinking about summer programming, you mentioned some of our community partners. You also mentioned that we are going to go ahead and do some pre-registration. And I'm not sure what all your strategies are as far as communicating to families. I think we need to over-communicate to families. As someone who previously ran one of your summer community partner programs, I can tell you that sometimes the parents would get confused. And that wasn't necessarily on the fault of CMS. That was maybe on my organization's fault of not communicating. They would sign up for both. And I just want to make sure that we are effectively, one, for the students' sake, signing up and registering all the students we need registered, and also providing that summer employment opportunity and securing that. The sooner I think that we can be, and I know we have a lot legislation. There's other governing bodies that are, controlling some of the things, and decisions have yet to be made on how all this will play out. But as soon as we can, be prepared to offer those opportunities, so that those teachers, if they're willing to work, don't go and sign up to work for the community partners. And we appreciate them, and I think they'll be great as a supplement. But it looks like our summer program this year will obviously be very robust. And so whatever we can do in the pre-planning, that would just be sort of my thoughts on that, to make sure we have clear communication and we don't dual enroll inadvertently. And then I guess just a thought, you talked about the 3 months. It seems like we have a long summer, but as the dates start to come together on this, I don't know if the legislature has hinted at possibly changing our fall start time. They did that last year. So we just want to be, I guess, all of us, on the lookout to see, because that could be something that happens and we wouldn't want the program to run too late, right? I've not had any indication that that's the case this year, but just something to think about. And then a quick thing about the pay. You talked about incentive pay. Is there anything in the legislation that limits like what the pay could be? Is that something, how's the process that if you go and you say, hey, we're going to have a 6-week program, like, is it limited to a certain amount based on a scale, or is that something where there's some discretion as far as what would be able to offer to our employees?
Ms. Pajot, can I defer to you on that?
Yeah, sure,
Thank you.
absolutely. I hope you all can hear me without a microphone. Basically, the statute outlines, or the proposed legislation outlines, really less benefits for an employee, because currently, as written, there are no, the employee would not earn retirement credit, and the employees are to be employed temporarily.
Right.
There's not anything that would necessarily limit what we would pay. So our compensation team is pulling together what could be a good incentive program to incentivize our high-quality teachers to participate in the program. I mean, we're talking about that, and we expect to have a proposal around that soon.
Great. I look forward to seeing that. Thank you.
Ms. Byers-Bailey?
Thank you. As we've looked at what is happening with our high schoolers, my heart aches for those kids who were on track to get honors or certificates or things as they began the year, and then the pandemic hit and it pretty much stalled or even possibly tanked their opportunities to earn those credits or those certificates. And I was looking at your summer program, and students have become leery of our credit recovery program because it limits their ability to qualify for scholarships, or that's been their experience. And I was wondering, especially for our seniors, would this give them an opportunity to, you said, I think you mentioned retake courses, or when they needed that one more thing to qualify them for whatever they were aiming at, and they weren't able to achieve in the level that they needed in order to qualify, and if they could retake that and thereby qualify for it.
Yes, historically, thank you for your question. Historically, we offer both credit recovery and the opportunity to enroll in new courses. That is something that we have a limitation on to make sure that we continue as we're condensing the scope of an entire course into a shorter period of time. Even though that these are much longer days, we want to make sure the integrity of the North Carolina Standard Course of Study is still intact. We're going to continue to reevaluate that this year based upon a 6-week ability to run programming to see how many courses we could offer from a stance of being able to take it for the first time or a retake. But we know that we're going to need to be able to rely on both models, both taking a new course or re-enroll in a course, but also there will need to be some reliance on credit recovery practices to make sure some students stay on target and on track for graduation on time. We'll need to be able to do both.
Okay.
Ms. Sawyer?
Thank you. I'm excited about this as it's developing. I would encourage us to think creatively about incentivizing families. Because it's a voluntary program, attendance is likely to be a challenge, and whether that's, real rewards for attendance every week or every 2 weeks or for the full program, incentives that reach both the student and the family, I think would be really important to really ensure that full participation every day. And also, I would fully support strong compensation for our teachers and instructional assistants during this time. I mean, the legislation is cruel in that it denies the benefits that they would normally get. But if we have any flexibility to offer compensation that actually meets the professional commitment we're asking of our staff and honors that professionalism, I would fully support it. I think it's going to be really hard to recruit teachers because they're exhausted. So, allowing a week or two after school's out and a little recovery time before school starts, I think is important. But I think really strong professional compensation is absolute.
I've got several things. Thank you. In targeting the students that will be coming, I just want to make sure we are very intentional and don't just rely on the voluntary aspect of people seeking us out, and that our principals and teachers really make sure those families know about it, and the students and these principals know exactly who those students are. So we do it sort of open-ended in a very fulsome way there. The other thing, several things, would there be, I know that the purpose of this is in-person learning. I'm sure that we still have some students that are in full remote that would like this opportunity as well, possibly. I would assume that would be a very small subset of kids, but I just to be thinking about this, if there was an option to do that, might not be a bad thing, particularly for kids that still might be dealing with illness based on the situation that we're in. The other thing I thought about in terms of teacher recruitment, if we could even do a team teach or a half program. I know it's not great for students to rotate in with different teachers, but in order to identify teams of teachers that would do that so that they'd only have to do half the program, but then the handoff would be easier. Attendance was something else, attendance fall off and how to address that. And obviously, I think the incentivizing would be an excellent thing. And certainly there are community partners that do things, as Ms. Shipp indicated, that kids like to do. And I think those are involving those community partners, because I know we oftentimes use them in the summer and they have different focuses in how they perform their program. So we're all going to need to be more all headed in the same direction, but I do think everybody wants to contribute and be part of that. So I just really look at this as an all-in kind of thing. And so the incentivizing that you mentioned could really also come from community partners and corporate partners in things in terms of broadband access. Could we say if a family participated all summer, would you get broadband access for the next 6 months? Something like that. Would you get a computer? Things like that we think would really be helpful to our families long term. So thank you.
Okay, thank you all for that really good feedback. And we are only 10 minutes over so far. That's what I'm focused on. I don't have anything. I think my colleague said covered everything that was on my list. So good luck as you finish building out that program that our children so greatly need this summer, in a way that supports our teachers as well, who have given everything and more the last year.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Brian, for that information. Good morning. My name is Angie Bartles. I'm the Executive Director of Strategy Management. Happy to be with you all today as we talk about our budget and strategic planning processes. As Superintendent Winston shared at the beginning of our meeting, we have 3 questions that are guiding our response to strategic planning for the next 18 months and for our budget requests resulting from that planning. The first is, how will we support all of our students? How will we support teachers so that they can support all of our students? And as Mr. Kingsley just highlighted for you, how will we bridge the gap and accelerate that learning in the interim? We now want to shift our focus to kind of the emerging response that's intended to answer the first 2 questions and think through how we support all of our students given their needs and teachers as they do that work. So when we met in January, this work that we're presenting to you today is the result of our annual strategic plan and budgeting processes. They're grounded in the 3 goals that this board established in our strategic plan. And also, you know, we have the targets that illustrate what those goals will look like in 2024 when we've attained them. And the superintendent has elevated 6 buckets of work for the next 18 months, which are our focus areas. So they're kind of the actions from the plan called out, the key levers for these next months moving forward to really hone our focus. I want to spend a few minutes before we dive in and look at the investments that are being proposed, thinking through these focus areas as a system of kind of interconnected levers that are going to really move us forward. So just wanted to take a minute to pause and reiterate what the 6 focus areas are and touch on the fact that they're not discrete, they really work together. So we are saying we believe that in order to improve outcomes, we have to raise the level and complexity of content and build our teacher knowledge and skill. We also have to increase the social, emotional, and mental health supports provided to our students. We have to ensure that students have access to and experience rigorous and advanced courses, maximize their time also in the classroom and in instruction by reducing chronic absenteeism and out-of-school suspension disproportionality. And we know that we need to build a system of supports that will target their intensive and supplemental needs, all while kind of sustaining the health of our district and the investment in our people and our operations. So that's how all of our focus areas work together. And today we're going to have each of the champions come and present to you the emerging potential investments from their focus areas that are taking kind of that emerging strategy that we shared in January to the next level. So before we go there, Madam Chair, did you want to outline the protocol for this morning?
Sure, thank you. It'll be, the protocol will be similar to our last budget workshop. So a champion will present on their focus area, and then that will take about 5 minutes. Then we will go around the room, and if you have any clarifying questions, that just means real fact-based, something that you're a little fuzzy on that you need clarification on, I'll go around the room and give everyone a chance to ask those questions. When we get to the end of all of the focus areas, you'll have an opportunity, everyone will have an opportunity to share your warm feedback and your cool feedback. So be keeping notes on a reminder of warm feedback means this is, I agree with this aligns with our strategic plan, this aligns with our goals and priorities. Cool feedback means you see a possible disconnect or a gap. You know, you want to say, the team may consider exploring blah, 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 blah. That's cool feedback. So keep notes as you're hearing this on your warm feedback, things that you're giving a thumbs up to because it's in alignment, or your cool feedback where you think something's out of alignment or something's missing. So if that makes sense, you'll hear on the focus area, you'll have a chance to ask clarifying questions, and then at the end, you'll give warm feedback and cool feedback on everything. Did I explain that right?
That was
Ms.
perfect.
Bartles?
Thank you.
Okay.
So we'll get started with our great teaching focus area, and Brian Kingsley, our Chief Academic Officer, will walk us through the potential investments emerging in that focus area.
Thank you, Angie. Appreciate that. And similar to our presentation on summer programming, I'm an ambassador for a huge amount of people that are working across our departments and here to represent their work. And I want to thank Beth Thompson and her leadership for being a team lead in this work and working with members of our Office of School Performance, our Magnet Programs HR team, as well as our accountability divisions and equity department as well. If I can orient your eyes to the top of the slide, I think it's important to know that we have emerging strategies and potential investments. This represents potential investments that would be represented in this particular budget. It doesn't necessarily, these bullets represent the totality of all of the work that's happening with great teaching across the district. As we think about great teaching, we know a couple of things to be true in our strategic plan. One, that we've set forth a charge that we are going to provision a guaranteed viable curriculum to our teachers and to our students by 2024. So what I share with you today is in service of getting closer to being able to attain that goal. The second thing is we know that in order to be able to provision curriculum, you're going to also need to be able to invest in teachers. The idea and the goal here is to have a great, high-quality teacher in every single one of our classrooms. And so the spirit of these investments reflects that as well. So ultimately, our students can become independent learners. The investments here that you see for curriculum, many of them you may be familiar with over the work that we've done together as a community over the last 2 years, and this becomes an extension. As you see 9 through 12 in grades, the subjects of mathematics and ELA, English Language Arts, we begin the work of now procuring a curricula for English courses as well as high school math courses that we will begin to implement across our high schools over the next 2 years, beginning with English 1 and Math 1, and that may have implications on some of our middle schools as well, as we know that a lot of our middle schools offer those particular high school courses. We know that as we continue to implement a high-quality curriculum in our grades K through 8 in English Language Arts and mathematics, that it requires continued investments and maintenance. What I mean by that is we continue to provision student print materials each and every year. We also know that we need to provision access to a digital platform for teachers to be able to access all of the resources, not just the lessons for students, but what makes these curricula great is they're also helping teachers become more developed in how to teach their various lessons and activities and become more knowledgeable on how to do that in an inclusive manner. And we also know, as we've invested deeply both in digital text for students to be able to use their Chromebooks to read, as well as print versions of text, and we've distributed both, that we have to have a small percentage to replenish trade books that may not come back in the same shape and form and order in which we distributed them. And so making sure that we're continuing to plan thoughtfully for that is a really, really important piece. I've heard from you all incredibly clear that we need to continue, that our budget reflects this moment. And so as we think about providing resources to help differentiate our core experiences, that is an investment in our people, in our time, through extended employment to ensure that our curriculum that we have in some instances already have begins to identify how we prioritize essential standards and essential practices, so what they're doing in classrooms and how they're utilizing it is maximizing it in the most efficient and most strategic way possible. That also has a special emphasis on ensuring that as we teach our curricula across our community, that we're incredibly inclusive, that we're thinking about how to provide extended English language learner supports in the curriculum, as well as opportunities to enrich our curriculum for those that may be identified for talent development services or high achieving students, that we can go deeper and not off into a different curriculum, but utilize the same content and the same text. Anything that we provision in terms of content requires a deep investment in our people. So as you go down to the second emerging strategy around developing the skills of our teachers, it's important to note that as we are developing them on technical things such as content and curriculum, we're also developing ourselves as a community, as a system, on who we are as people, and becoming more reflective and doing the mirror work that's necessary to become an anti-racist organization. You may see professional development around race, power, bias, and anti-racism show up in different focus areas, Please note that's by design. It shouldn't be left to one specific department. It should be an all-inclusive approach that as we're developing all of our stakeholders, that we're being really clear around the integration and the intersection of those important topics that have to do with who we are and how we show up in the work, with the things that we need to do to implement to provide high-quality instruction for all of our teachers and, all of our students. You can see that all of the different bullets, I won't read them all to you, but they should match in most instances the various investments and content that are above, and we're really excited about that. And we also know that we need to continue to provision a professional development platform for all of our teachers. We've learned a lot this year. Our PD 2 years ago was sending 1,000 people to the convention center downtown to launch a curriculum. We've learned a lot since then. That worked for some, didn't work for others. And now we have the opportunity to leverage our technologies, to listen to our teachers, to provide more flexible professional development, and use our technologies in more meaningful ways that become more adaptive and engaging for our faculty, and we want to continue to invest in that space as well. Lastly, our secondary schools, as you know, do not have the same infrastructures in their school buildings to provide the same level of coaching and support to their teachers that some of our elementary schools do that have full-time instructional facilitators. So as we begin to engage in the thoughtful work of adopting and implementing curricula with integrity and fidelity to make sure that they have the infrastructures that are needed and it doesn't fall just solely on the shoulders of our principals matters. And so we're going to continue to invest in our middle school staff in that way for English, language arts, and math, and begin to invest in the people infrastructures of our high schools so they have point people that can help lead this effort and support their teachers, which I think is incredibly important. Lastly, I'll share that monitoring effectiveness is incredibly important for all of our investments. And you may say, well, why are we just doing that in world languages? That's not the case. I want to be honest about that. We know that we need to monitor the effectiveness of all of our work. In many instances, that doesn't require a line item. We can do that through our time, our processes, our way of work, our focus on continuous improvement. But we do know that world languages is not an area across our district or our state that provisions assessments that we can validate and assure that students are actually mastering content. And so we provision for that to embed that in our courses. So we have really a good faith level of confidence that when children are actually receiving credit in those courses and moving towards a seal of biliteracy, that we have great confidence in our brand promise that that matters. And so you see a continued investment for expansion in that particular area as we continue to grow in service of that work that you have charges to do through our district equity policy. So that, I don't want to break the protocol, so please forgive me. I'm not sure what happens next. I'm sorry.
It's okay. We all have our areas. So next, now it's just some quick clarifying questions. If you need any clarification on what you just heard. Ms. Sawyer, let me go by round robin. So I'll start with Ms. Marshall, then Ms. Sawyer.
I may have been shuffling a page while you mentioned this because we're moving fast. Thank you. Physical education equipment, what was that about?
I totally skipped that, ma'am. I'm so sorry.
No worries, no worries. Well, anyway.
I start talking about curriculum, I go into another universe sometimes. Yeah. Thank you for bringing me back there. That's an important investment. Through the lens of our district equity policy, we have presented a current state for not just physical education a couple of months ago to all of you in this very same room, but also talked about the current health of music and dance and the arts. And we have, as a staff, taken full advantage of the pandemic to work with teams to deploy them to schools to take full inventory of the various equipment and facility use that we have in all of those respective areas. As all of you know, and you're thoughtfully engaged in a district FF&E process, as we begin to open new buildings, there is a standard level of equipment, a floor of excellence that we create for all schools that we bring on. As we're grappling with as a community, we also know as we create a standard, we also need to have a strategy in place to backfill any other schools that may be below that standard. It's a very similar problem of practice that we experience in English, language arts, and math. We have engaged in that thoughtful process around our physical education and wellness courses, and there is a significant deficit from where our schools currently are and what we say is the standard. And we are saying that as we invest in academics, we know that we're also going to need to double down on wellness. Our B3 initiatives and making sure that all of our schools, elementary through our high schools, have access to the same equipment on standard is really important, and that's the spirit in which this investment is here.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Sawyer?
In the professional development, in terms of the rolling out of the new math and ELA curriculum in the high school, are we able to do that PD in-house like we are with the elementary, or is this the first year and we're going to be using outside?
Traditionally, in the first year, there's a heavier reliance on the external partner. I don't want to say too much more because we're still in the middle of the procurement process for high school English, and so that those models are yet to be decided. I would say, though, we have built out under Dr. Hayes and Mr. Winston's leadership a robust service delivery model that aligns to all of our learning communities, not just in the schoolhouse, but central office staff members that can begin to build their own capacity to provide services, and that is represented in this budget as well. So we will get there.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any clarifying questions, Ms. Bailey?
I'm concerned, I don't know whether this is a clarifying question or it's just one of the cools.
It's, if you have a concern, it sounds cool. Okay. So why don't you hold it?
All right, then skip me then. I'll look
Okay.
to the cool.
Ms. De La Hara, any clarifying questions?
Yes, thank you. Just one quickly. Under curriculum, you list magnet programs, dual language. I just want to clarify, are we looking at purchasing or expanding, developing upon our current curriculum? Tell me just a little bit more about that.
Thank you for lifting that up. That's another area that I think I may have skipped in just talking about other curriculum. As we had an opportunity to, as I just shared with you, our methodology of going in and evaluating our physical education and all those other courses, our magnet programs are also a part of that work, continuing to try to identify across all sectors, how do we create a national model in this district in everything that we do. And as we did that for our dual language programs, what we recognized is that the curriculum that we have just invested in needs to also be offered in the language in which the dual language program is being offered. And in some instances, that isn't always in place. And so we want to double down on those experiences to invest in the content, both in literacy and math, science, and social studies, in the languages that the dual language program is centered on, not just in English. And those are investments that are very much needed. Our dual language schools today are doing an incredible job of making that work with various assets, but it's not necessarily systematized at the district level and standardized, and that's the investment that we're trying to represent in this budget.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Clarifying questions, Mr. Strain?
Thank you. So I want to have a look at curriculum real quick, because we got, if I take math 1, 2, and 3, those obviously build on one another, right? Math 2 builds on math 1, math 3 significantly builds on math 1 and math 2. If we go back to combination of curriculum and teachers, recognizing the challenges that our students have had this year in mastering content, we also need to have a conversation about promotion, because I'm concerned that for next year, when a student enters math 2 or math 3, they won't have the foundational elements from the previous 1 or 2 years in order to succeed, unless we actually promote on merit. And so I just want to put a pin in that to say we need to have a conversation at some point, because the curriculum obviously changes if students are promoted. Not that we don't have this challenge in the best of times, but we have this challenge in spades unless we hold promotion to promotion based on merit. And there will be a significant challenge then for the students and the teachers through our curriculum, because we'll be asked math 2 teachers to be teaching math 1. Math 3 to be teaching math 1 and math 2, unless we're able to do promotion based on merit, which I certainly believe we need to do. And so thus that ties back to the assessment as well. But it kind of loops in all those pieces. And if you can noodle on that, I'd like to hear more about how that impacts the curriculum and the teaching, and what that means in terms of our promotion plans. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just a little feedback, that, I'm not sure that was a clarifying question, so that sort of thing for the rest of us, save that for the end. Ms. Shipp, do you have any clarifying questions?
Yes, I wanted to know, I wasn't sure what you mentioned, or did you mention TD students when unfinished instruction? What are we looking at there in terms of more TD teachers as well, and the experience level of TD teachers, because we know that's been a question about the amount of time and support we have for TD teachers to work with students. So we have unfinished instruction. Clarify that in terms of curriculum.
Yeah, sure. That investment's twofold. It's investment in content. We want to make sure as we listen to our teachers, both TD as well, all teachers that have students, whether they're identified or not, that may want opportunities to stay learning on the same themes and topics, but go deeper, to have it be more enriching, go beyond, and not, outsource to something completely separate from what the class is learning. We need to continue to provision those resources. And so in the content piece, the curriculum, we're going to continue to add lessons and units and other activities that allow students to be able to go deeper and be more engaged if they're hungry and ready for that, right? Secondly, to that, it requires an investment in our people. Our TD teachers, we have a robust set of professional development opportunities for our TD teachers, high-achieving teachers, teachers of high-achieving students, that not only is centered on how to use those resources, but how to also make sure that we're engaging students and identifying students that have potential in schools in meaningful ways. So it's a twofold investment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we have two board members joining us online. So Ms. Cheek has indicated she does not have any questions just yet. Dr. Jones just joined us. So Dr. Jones, do you need me to go through the protocol here for the questions, or did you hear that part?
I did not.
Okay, so what we're doing, after each expert presents on their part of the budget, we're taking a quick round of just clarifying fact-based questions, just like, I didn't quite catch blah, 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 blah. And if you have any warm feedback or cool feedback, then we're saving that for the very end of the presentation after we've heard all of the budget presentations. So I don't know if you even had a chance to hear. I know you had to tune in a little bit late. I don't know if you've heard what Brian has presented thus far, but if you have any clarifying questions on that, this would be the time to ask.
I tuned in too late to really ask the questions that I have. So
Okay, well, we will move on then to the next section, which is access to advanced coursework.
Yes, and for that, I'd like to welcome Akeisha Craven-Howell, our Associate Superintendent for Student Assignment and School Choice, who's the champion for this focus area.
Oh, while she's coming in, define unfinished instruction for me, please.
Sorry, say that again, Dr. Jones?
While she's coming in, we'll have Brian explain unfinished instruction. I don't know what that means.
Oh, Brian just stepped away from the mic, so Ms. Craven-Howell could take his seat, but unfinished instruction means the instruction that was interrupted by the pandemic.
Okay, thank you.
And Madam Chair, what we've tried to do is be intentional about not saying, referring to it as learning loss, but unfinished instruction. So you can swap those phrases, Dr. Jones.
Thank you.
Okay, you're up, Ms. Craven-Howell.
Thank you. Good morning. I am excited to lead the team around access to advanced coursework along with Condra Ratley. It is a cross-functional team with representation from members of advanced studies, teaching and learning, and equity and accountability. When we think about our vision for students having access to and success in advanced coursework, it's really about students having early opportunities starting in middle school to explore and express their interests, to transition from middle school into high school with an intentional high school plan for the courses that they will take over those 4 years, and how that will build and prepare them for their post-secondary plan. We want that plan to be able to follow the student. We want the plan to be informed by the student, and we intend for it to be dynamic, because we know From the point at which a student enters high school and the point at which they graduate, their interests will change. Their knowledge about what's possible for them in a post-secondary environment will change. And so what we believe has to take place in order to facilitate that kind of planning, that kind of support to make changes, the kind of support to intervene when students aren't making the progress that's articulated in that plan, is what's represented here in the investments for access to advanced coursework. So thinking about those student supports, programs like AVID, expanding the ways in which we identify students for AIG and talent development services, having tools where students can capture their interests and plan and have that follow them regardless of where they are in CMS. We also want to make sure that the systems and structures and routines are in place in school so that students have adult supports to monitor that plan with them, help them to make decisions. We've seen a lot of this work and have a lot to build on through the Access 2024 work, through Condra Ratley's leadership, and that builds on the EOS work, the Equal Opportunity Schools that we started a few years ago. We know that students must have equitable access to high-quality advanced programs. When we think about our advanced programs, we're talking about things like advanced placement, career and technical education programs that you had a chance to hear more about just this past Tuesday, International Baccalaureate in Cambridge. We're also looking at dual enrollment opportunities. And it's important to know that as we help students identify their high school plan as well as their post-secondary plan, that we see all these options for advanced coursework as equal. We want students to know that an AP course is just as valuable as a dual enrollment course, just as valuable as earning an industry credential as a result of going through a CTE pathway. In order to make sure that our advanced courses and programs are of high quality, we do want to invest in professional learning for our teachers and counselors in the building. One of the areas that you'll see an investment for professional learning is around mindsets and bias. Unfortunately, we know that there are mindsets around who belongs in advanced courses just based on who has been disproportionately represented in advanced coursework. And it's important that we acknowledge these mindsets and we help adults in buildings to address them in productive ways. You will actually see that investment in multiple focus areas, and it's because it is a part of the district's broader work around anti-racism and addressing systemic and structural racism and the ways in which it prohibits some students from having access to success.
Okay. Clarifying questions. I see your hand, Ms. Marshall.
Could you, in school and staff support, student advisory, beyond the counseling suite, I think I like that, but I couldn't tell you what,
Yes.
all the components. So
Absolutely. That's a great question. We know that we are challenged when it comes to our ratio of students to counselors. And we know that in order for students to have the kind of dynamic plan that we're talking about and the kind of support they need to actually actualize it, that it's going to require a much tighter ratio of students to adults. And so we believe structures like looping advisories, where one adult has a relationship with 25 to 30 students throughout their 9th through 12th grade experience in high school, is a way to provide that additional support and relationship.
okay, and that would be built into the school day,
Yes,
correct?
ma'am, built into the school day.
Okay.
Ms. Sawyer?
May I ask a
I
question?
missed EOS.
Equal Opportunity Schools, it was a program that started in a handful of schools to identify students who were traditionally not recognized or promoted into advanced coursework. We have built on and expanded that work through Condra Ratley's leadership to Access 2024. It is now in all of our comprehensive high schools as well as Hawthorne High School.
Dr. Jones, did I hear that you have a clarifying question?
Yes, I had the opportunity as well as Chairperson Dashew to listen in on the Statesville Road AP certification, I guess it's called. They received a rather scathing report that, number one, is that the program itself is not up to par, and certainly they don't have the teachers certified. So in developing the skills of teachers, I think that was the most critical aspect of what they had, the feedback they had to give us. Are
So
you familiar?
do you have a question that you need Ms. Craven-Howell to clarify based on?
That's the question, yes. The question is, what are we doing about developing teacher skills?
Absolutely. And so when we talk about equitable access to, I believe what she's referring to is States Road Elementary's IB authorization visit this week. And so when we talk about professional learning and equitable access to advanced courses, it's not enough to have IB programs or AP courses spread throughout the district. They have to be of equal quality. And we know that that is the case, and part of that is investing in professional learning and perhaps disproportionately investing in places where we know that programs are lagging behind.
And my question is, why haven't we done that?
It is something that we have been doing and will continue to do.
Okay, so my feedback to you from what I heard is it has not been viable, according to.
So Dr. Jones, we're going to save that kind of feedback for later in the meeting. Okay. Ms. Byers-Bailey, do you have any clarifying questions?
I heard the ELS mentioned, but I don't see it on here. Where, did I miss it somewhere?
EOS.
That program.
Equal Opportunity Schools, EOS.
EOS, okay.
Yes, ma'am. That program has evolved to Access 2024, and so you see that listed as the first program under school and staff supports.
School and staff support, okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms.
Yes,
Delahara?
thank you. Just a quick question about the PSAT. That I thought was already paid for, but that's something we're going to, it's a potential investment?
It's a continuing investment. It's one of the ways that we have historically identified students for AP potential, but we're also looking at broadening and expanding the ways that we would be able to do that.
And I apologize for not saying this earlier. You'll see on many of the slides, both new and continued or existing investments.
Okay.
And that was intentional so that we could illustrate kind of a comprehensive solution set, if you will, to the strategies that are outlined. But thank you for the question.
Sure, thank you.
Mr. Strain, any clarifying questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is around the metrics associated with this. So there's clearly an objective. This is advancing that objective. How are we measuring the success of this particular initiative, both providing more access to advanced coursework, as well as our students' ability to take advantage of that and successfully accomplish that advanced coursework?
The two ultimate metrics of the work are the extent to which students are graduating, having had success in at least one advanced course, whether that be indicated by having earned a CTE industry credential, having college credit from a dual credit, dual enrollment course, AP credit, IP diploma, and then also students graduating with at least one DPI endorsement. And there are 4 different endorsements, each of which are described by a specific regimen of course taking. Those are lagging indicators. We don't get those until a student graduates. Leading indicators would be things like students taking Math 1 by the end of middle school, because we know then that they could take advanced math coursework when they get into high school. It would be things like measuring to make sure that all students do have a high school and a post-secondary plan. And so when we have investments like Navient, that helps us to monitor and know that that is the case.
Would AP pass rates and those sorts of things contribute to that metric portfolio as well?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Ms. Shipp, any clarifying questions?
I just have one, and content-specific professional development. And we know that's so important, professional development. How do we look at the timing and schedule for this? Because many times they're pulled during the day, doing instruction and getting coverage when they need to be with students. And so when we're starting new curriculum, a new things where teachers need content-specific professional development. Have you looked at how that's going to work?
Yes, ma'am, it's a great question, and I think it's important to know that the champions for each of these focus areas are working together because there's professional learning indicated in almost every one of these focus areas. And so we have to collaborate to make sure, how are we timing that? How are we pacing it out? Are the same teachers being pulled from their buildings such that they're not able to actually spend time in front of their students in instruction? Those are things that we want to avoid and make sure that in our adult learning plan, we have been mindful of. So none of this professional development is happening in isolation. Thank you for raising that.
All right. And Ms. Cheek said she did not have any clarifying questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And next up, I'd like to welcome Latarja Henry, our Chief of Staff, who's the champion for the TIME team.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
So I have had the privilege of working with a team of principals and other staff on the action team called TIME. And the feedback that you all provided at the last session and in between sessions is that, well, why call it TIME? The spirit behind it is that we really want to maximize all of the time our students have with us, even when they are not in the classroom. So the goal is to make sure that they have as much time with the supports they need around social, emotional, and academic learning. So with that, there are 3 particular emerging strategies that I'd like to share an overview with you on. A few of them are not new. They are continuing to go on, and there are 2 that would be new. In the first area, we want to extend our investment around crisis prevention intervention, and that really is a strategy focused on giving the tools to BMTs, campus security associates, and other school staff around de-escalating crises that a child might be having verbally, psychologically, physically, and so that's a training dedicated to that. There's also the restorative practice training, and sidebar, we're going to go deeper in restorative practices later on this year, but to make sure everyone is level set on what that is, restorative practices actually focuses on healing harm and repairing relationships that happen as a result of something that's happened through a word or a deed. So in this, what we're saying is that we really want to anchor our approach in restorative practices and expand that to other schools. Currently, there are 52 schools that are on the, restorative practice spectrum. They are actually at some point of learning it and implementing it. And what we really want to do is make sure that that is an option for all schools. Around suspension and interventions, so an example of a restorative practice, not the actual training, but a practice is in-school suspension. We all know that every day will not be a green day for students. And in the event that they would actually need some more additional support around their behavior, what we are actually proposing is an intervention center coordinator pilot, so that there would be 10 schools that we would identify, obviously using data, that we would actually have a staff position that is an upgrade from what currently is an assistant level position. So if you think about in-school suspension in middle and high school, there's an assistant level position, and oftentimes principals do creative things with that position, like trade it in for other things. What we are actually suggesting is that we would upgrade that position to the level of a lead BMT position. That's not the name of it, but it would be at that same level. And the spirit of that is really to make sure that the students have an opportunity to get the social and emotional supports they need in real time through the in-school suspension model for middle and high school. And that this would be an individual who would be qualified to pour in social and emotional supports and also allow them to continue their learning at the same time. That would actually be a new investment. The last area is around the universal behavioral support specialist. You should know that there are actually currently 2 of those that exist in the district now, and they're out of Dr. Penn's team. What we are proposing is that we actually add 6 more such that each of these positions would be placed in the learning communities. So you would actually have 2 in Central 1, 2 in Central 2, and then 1 in all of the others, and it would be the position that would be accountable to and for supporting the schools within those learning communities around integrating restorative practices, African American male resiliency, PBIS, and so that's a way to really provide targeted support to schools through this position in the learning communities. You have heard in both great teaching and also advanced coursework, the issue of race, power, and bias training and support for staff. Really, this is to point to the fact that really our work around anti-racism is really targeted across the board. It's not a standalone strategy. And so the idea is, again, with these positions, we're able to push in that kind of support that points directly to systems and structures that might be having a disproportionate impact on students. And with that, I pause. Right, Angie? Okay.
All right, clarifying questions, Ms. Marshall.
Could you, I'm going to go back to number 2, suspension interventions.
Yes.
Could you talk about, I may have missed, the site at Marie G. Davis?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I skipped over that, I apologize. So you will know we currently have 6 short-term, that's not new, 6 short-term suspension sites. That's where kids can go instead of staying home. They can't do ISS, but this is the place where you go. They're embedded throughout the community. It's a new location, not a new site. So it would make it 7 total. We have 7, but we had to work with Parks and Rec to change a location. So I apologize. So it's not a new, it's a new site, but it's a new location, same strategy.
Same strategy? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any clarifying questions, Ms. Sawyer? Ms. Byers-Bailey?
Where on Marigi's campus is this new site?
So if you're on Marigi's campus facing the old campus, it's the modular unit there where it will be.
Is that where the old high school was?
It's a modular unit.
Yeah, the modular unit. So it's I don't know how to describe it, but it's behind the new school.
Yeah.
In front of the old school.
Okay.
Kind of.
Thank you.
Sorry, kind of.
Welcome to.
I mean, we use every piece of square footage.
Yeah, no kidding.
Okay, Ms. Delahara?
Yes, 2 quick clarifying questions.
Sure.
On the CPI training, the de-escalation training, is that something that is already going on?
Yes,
and we're
ma'am.
expanding?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
I just want to clarify. And then the staff support, the race, power, and bias training, is that something that would be done in-house or through an external vendor?
Oh, no. That's in-house. And again, this is our work. This is the journey that we're on as an organization to analyze systems and processes and procedures that are having disproportionate outcomes. And we know that we have high numbers of children who are disproportionately suspended, both in school and out of school suspension. So it is looking at how do we begin to analyze our practices, teachers, administrators, and again, other folks that have an influence on those outcomes.
Right, and I get that there's the analysis piece, but then it says there's actual training then, I guess, based off what of that analysis is, and I'm guessing that's specifically for like the BMT and other behavioral specialists. So is that then the designing, the training being designed specifically for them from in-house staff based
Yes.
off of that analysis?
Yes, and it's not just BMTs, it would be teachers as well, teacher assistants, all of the people who actually influence the outcomes of who gets to
Right.
stay and who gets to go.
Yeah, and I do see that, like even in the previous slides, it's across the board. I guess I was just thinking of it specifically for that for the time piece, but it's institution-wide, I get
Yes,
that. Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Mr. Strain?
Thank you, Madam Chair. But with regards to the body of work, I don't think I have a whole lot of questions. The one that I would raise is in terms of where I can get some more information in terms of the definition and metrics around and activities around the race, power, and bias
Sure.
anti-racism training. So understanding what that program looks like and what the objectives of that programming are and how we go about measuring the success of that programming.
Absolutely.
That would be very helpful. And then at a higher level, looking at the objectives defined under time, clearly focusing on maximizing instructional time for students, reducing chronic absenteeism. Unfortunately, as you know, this year, we've gotten hit very hard
Absolutely.
in this area. And so, again, I would like to understand what those metrics show and to understand the extent to which, you know, we're actually in a very different position starting next year or this summer or even right now, right, than we ever have been before. And so understanding that, because that's a new benchmark from which we've got to work in order to have folks re-engage. Because, as you well know, these two items here, we've been hit in spades.
And the drivers behind chronic absenteeism have shifted as well. So how we actually have defined it and our new definition of how kids are actually engaging in this new time, you're absolutely right. We've seen that increase. Yeah.
That'd be very helpful.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
No worries.
Ms. Shipp?
One question here. I don't know if you said like PBIS, I'm just going to look at that one. Is this, I know we've done this before, are we coming back looking at training or more support, more schools involved in PBIS? What are we looking at here when we talk about?
So we're not, PBIS is institutionally kind of here in CMS. Really, we're looking at trying to align all of the strategies, so schools are not thinking they have to pick and choose which one, but this really is a focus on saying, how are we going to influence climate and culture at our school? Here are all the tools that you can do that with.
So they'll get to pick, it's not going to be schools that are required to be in this or asked to be in it because of maybe a need?
So for our, no, so PBIS, so I'm stuttering because the reality is that whole pick notion, this really is aimed at saying what is a consistent way for us to address behavior that will influence it. And the question that you raise is a good one. Should you be able to pick that, right? So there's strategies within that can influence culture. And so we want everyone to be working from the same level of strategies. That's the way to put it.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, that's good. Thank you.
Ms. Cheek has indicated she doesn't have any questions on this section. Dr. Jones, do you have any clarifying questions?
No.
Okay. All right. Oh, actually, let me think. I do have one question myself. So, and I know you mentioned we're doing a deep dive on restorative practices later, so we can really see it illustrated, so we can understand how it works. I think if you're not in the schoolhouse taking part in that practice, it's hard to wrap your head around it, so I appreciate that. And there are a lot of initiatives here that some of the training that you're talking about for the BMTs, et cetera, I would just love to know, you don't have to answer now for clarifying, but would love to just understand more deeply what that looks like. And also, how do we know whether it's working or who's doing it well and who isn't doing it as effectively? How do we even know that? What does that look like? So, you know.
I think one of the things that we have to keep top of mind is that the goal is to reduce recidivism and to also reduce disproportionality. So the data is absolutely going to tell us if we're nailing this by the numbers of students and the numbers of students who are repeat students for having not found success and being able to stay in school.
But item by item, you know, is this school doing, you know, this kind
PBIS
of
well,
training,
is it?
knocking it out of the park, but they need some help with restorative practices. You know what I mean? Like that, how do we have ways to measure effectiveness for each practice?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, and next up, we'll have the student wellness focus area, and Dr. Condra Ratley, our Associate Superintendent for High School Equity, and Dr. Katrine Penn, our Executive Director for Student Wellness, will represent their work.
Good morning.
Morning.
The summary that you see before you is a result of the work of the Student Wellness Action Team. which was comprised of counselors, psychology, our behavior, social emotional, and our physical fitness specialists. The team remained grounded in focusing on increasing the social emotional and mental health support for all students while contributing to the organizational culture that supports social emotional wellness of all members. So recognizing that student well-being oftentimes is interconnected with staff well-being, and you'll hear more from the health of our organization or health of district action team. The initial work in this area landed into 3 buckets of work that make up our emerging strategy. You see those before you in terms of building internal capacity of our staff, utilizing high-quality resources and tools, and broadening access to provide direct student support.
And so when we talk about the potential investments that we are proposing under each of these 3 categories, under Category 1 in staff support, what you will see there is a continued focus on increasing student access to social and emotional specialized staff. So specifically this year, it would be, or looking at 21-22, we would propose to focus on increasing the availability of social work services while holding, and school psychology while holding steady with our current school counseling. We're also looking at the importance of staff support from the standpoint of raising the professional skill set, not only of counselors, social workers, and psychologists, but also increasing our teachers' ability to address core behavior needs, which ties in with what LaTarja just spoke about. But so supporting teachers in improving their classroom management skills and other strategies and supports that they would need in order to be highly effective with students in general, but also in a post-COVID environment. Looking at tools and resources, there we're looking not only at the question of what are the core social and emotional resources that we are using to provide SEL instruction K through 12, but also how are we screening? So Board Member Strain mentioned, for example, that having assessment data to understand where our students are is going to be critical for a successful return to traditional school, I will say. That includes not only your academic data, but we've got to know where our kids are socially and emotionally as well. And so in this section, we're not only talking about our SEL screener and our panorama tool, but also additional opportunities for increasing student access to those social and emotional supports. For example, broadening the availability of sources of strength, which is an upstream suicide prevention program. And then do you want to talk about student support?
Sure. Just as mentioned, in this area, we're talking about direct student support, and you see various different options there in this deck on that slide. The mental health-based services, expanding upon those, being able to build upon our Turning Point mental health integration and continuing that work, but then also reaching into other direct supports, as you see with our partnerships with agencies such as communities and schools.
All right. Any clarifying questions? I'll give you guys a second. Pardon?
I'm okay. You go. I hadn't gotten there yet. You go ahead.
You want to start, Mr. Strain?
Please. Dr. Penn, thank you for the acknowledgement that we can't really put a plan together if we don't have a benchmark, we don't have the metrics, we don't know what the results look like. And again, and we'll say it many, many times before we stop, this year in this area has been tremendously detrimental to our kids. And so from that perspective, what do you need in order to provide better information about our students' needs, our youth's needs in this community, and how to meet them. Because I just, you and I have worked for years on this. And it seems to me that we are absolutely in a different place now with regards to this. And we have to be very conscious, conscientious, and deliberate in terms of measurement and meeting those needs. We heard all about this last summer. So my question to you in terms of clarifying, I got all this from a strategic approach perspective. I'm hearing lots about programs and what we should do, and let's talk about where we are, and in acknowledgement of that, what specific investments we need to make so that we can best meet the needs of our students. And this is one that concerns me to no end as a result of what our kids have been through over the last 12 months. And will continue to over the next 6 months. And those needs will not end there. They will be many years. So we really need to understand, particularly in this area, because academics are fairly straightforward in terms of measurement and benchmarking and understanding results. Dr. Penn, we need a really crisp plan and set of, what you need and your team needs. Dr. Ratley, in terms of how we go about identifying and meeting these needs and measuring the results and the metrics associated with that.
So what I will share in response to your questions and your concern is this year, the move to go district-wide with Panorama, our SEL screening tool, has been pivotal in us being able to understand what the needs of our students are in grades 3 through 12 around their own perception of their social and emotional skills, and also their beliefs about relationships with teachers in their buildings and their beliefs about the school climate. Both of those factors, separately and together, are critical to the students' overall well-being and also their school experience. So what the Panorama data allows us to do is it allows us to identify what we need to focus on at core, meaning for all students, through the advisory block and social and emotional learning instruction, but it also pulls out for us kids whose social and emotional perceptions of themselves are significantly different than the average. And so it lets us know, beyond those students who are acting out behaviors, which will show up in the time in schoolwork, this identifies for us the kids who might be suffering silently. And so it does allow us to say, who are kids that we need to pull out and take a deeper dive in, talk with them, talk with their families, and consider providing social, emotional, behavioral, or mental health intervention. We haven't had that before. And so this is the first year we've gotten that, and we will be administering that again this April. And one of the things that we will be looking towards for summer work with our social and emotional staff is to pull the PLCs or the teams together to do a deep dive in not only their Panorama data, but also to look at other behavioral indicators that a student might be struggling with engagement, with learning, with mental health. That includes your attendance data. It includes any discipline data, however little we may have this school year, but they'll be looking at that data and planning for what they will do around core and interventions this summer for the fall. So there are things like that that have not been part of our typical practice that we'll put in place this year. I'll add that we are working towards procurement of a curriculum for the high school advisory block. And so that will also support them at the high school level and what is delivered to high school students at core.
And I'll follow up with that just to say, I do think that the Panorama screener, I don't know if this is warm feedback, I'll save it for later. Ms. Shipp and then Ms. Marshall.
I think this is a clarifying question. I wanted to understand more about the school-based mental health services. By our students not being in school through more, how will we address, and I don't know if is that going to be here too, about how to support parents to know where they can go, what they can do when they're social, emotional, mental issues going on. How are we working through that? And that, is this what we're looking at here?
There's one portion around with our school-based, when we look at the fact that, yes, our students are not here. However, our principals and school teams are still making sure that they check in with students, members of Cotrain's team in terms of case management. So there are still those systems at play to ensure that we're not losing sight of our students' needs. Obviously, the social work team helps to connect those families with any outside agencies that may need additional intervention. But just because our students are at home does not lead us to not making sure that we're taking care of our students from an academic perspective as well as from a social emotional perspective.
Yes.
Is anything?
Thank you. And I had schools to tell me they made 100 visits.
Yes.
Social workers, so I should have. Thank you.
Thank you.
My question is real quick. So the very first thing you talked about was school-based counselor, social worker, and psychologist, and I thought I understood that we would be trying to pursue more positions for social workers and psychologists, but holding steady with counselors?
That's correct.
Okay.
That is correct. That bucket of work is also around building staff capacity, so we don't want it lost, that we've still focused on our current counseling staff to make sure that we will continue to coach and build their capacity as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, and next up, we have Dr. Frank Barnes, our Chief Equity Officer, representing the academic performance focus area.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Now, it should be said that the cumulative impact and effect of all of these all these areas working in concert with each other will help develop academic performance. Yet, and still, there's some things that we can do to buoy and accelerate academic performance across the district. One of those things is the systematic, system-wide implementation of a system that can help students who are missing some foundational skills that are inhibiting their ability to access core instruction to be able to have that up and have it be universally applied and universally experienced. This is not intended or meant to be or will replace core instruction. This is a complement to that instruction so the students can more easily access it. So what this particular sets of investments, many of which are existing, some which be new, and one which is state subsidized, is to build a system to universally screen those students for these foundational skills, particularly English language arts and mathematics, to have an infrastructure and the skills based in a school to be able to look at those data and to make sure that each student who has a need can make sure, as a complement to our core instruction, receive the intensity and duration of supports that they need to help them accelerate their learning and growth, to be able to progress monitor, not just the progress of those students in response to that intervention, but also to make sure that they're receiving the dosage of the intervention they're supposed to be in the time frame that they are. And for us to then make sure that they're, as they need less intense or perhaps different types of interventions, that they get those. And these particular sets of interventions are to be able to provide those investments, are for the screener that we need that would allow us to do both national benchmarking and would be computer adaptive, would allow us to both provide licenses for interventions where they're needed, as well as training for teachers and other staff to implement those interventions with integrity and fidelity, as well as platforms to monitor that students are actually experiencing the intervention and progressing, so that if they are not progressing as they should be, we can modify the kind of treatment or intervention they're receiving. But once again, I can't say it sufficiently enough. This is not to replace core instruction. This is a complement so students can access it. And I want to also say this is standing up. Also, as students can catch up on standards. So this is a complement to work to catch up on standards, but around those foundational skills. Please, any...
Time for clarifying questions? Okay. And Dr. Jones, we're hearing a bit of feedback from your computer. Would it be all right if are you able to mute that and then just unmute when you need to speak?
Yes.
But before you do you have any clarifying questions? I'll take that as a no. Anybody, colleagues, any clarifying questions for what Dr. Barnes just presented on? Ms. Marshall?
I'm going to say I'm a little confused, partly because I've been following on the four things, but I think you really, you put everything all in one, and this is a way to assess, to figure out dosage for what students need, to work that into the day. Did I get that right?
You captured the gist of it, yes, ma'am. A way for us to identify students who need some assistance with some foundational skills, a way to use those data to make sure they get an intervention to help them better access core instruction, and a way to then monitor to make sure they're getting that within the school day, integrated into the school day.
Okay.
And
Ms. Sawyer?
in terms of the universal screening, we already have the map. Do we also have are both of these existing screeners?
The screener is NWA's MAP assessment, and that's an ongoing investment.
Okay, I didn't realize that the acronyms went together. Okay. So what aspects of this are new initiatives?
I would say a part of a team that has been working, I would say, for the better part of 18 to 24 months has been looking at, okay, we have the data because we've been administering it, but what is our response in reaction to those data to be able to identify evidence-based interventions? And here's the one thing I want to hopefully not get too cryptic, but the difference between research-based and evidence-based. Something that's research-based could say the research body says that it should work or could work with a certain population of students. Evidence-based is that there have been either experimental or quasi-experimental models that says it does work when implemented with a group of students. So there has been a group from throughout the district being able to identify those, vet for those, and then be able to acquire licenses for those. So some of those things are new, and some of that PD would be expanded upon. So I would say a number of these interventions are already in place in our district, but not at the scale that we need to grow them. And so this would be able to build on the work of that cross-functional team has already been doing, has already been underway.
Okay. And is the expansion in progress monitoring, is that staying the same, or is that also expanding?
I would say that would also be expanding. So you can consider, with the exception of our screening, all of these would be expansions of a systematic, system-wide approach.
Okay. Thank you. That's it.
Ms. Byers-Bailey?
Thank you. So in doing these screenings and interventions, will this take the students out of class? Is this taking up learning time?
It should not take them out of their core content instruction. What that will require for us as a district is to be able to build schedules that will build in time for students to experience that and not miss some of their core content instruction.
Okay, thank you.
And my question sort of builds back off of that. What I'm looking at, Orton Gillingham, for example, as an intervention, and then I'm imagining that the teachers or teaching assistants have to be trained in the use of that intervention. Are we investing as part of that, like investing in the expansion of that, like for teaching assistants, so that they could, during small group instruction, skills block or something like that, push in and help? Is that like the model of that, and is that part of it? Like there's the purchase of the actual methodology or the intervention, but then the investment on the training side of it, is that?
There is investment for classroom teachers or their equivalents to be able to, and there would have to be training, and there are investments to pay for that training as well, yes.
And are teaching assistants able to do that piece, just as one example? I mean, there's several on here, but is that something that they're able to do?
That would be something that a licensed classroom teacher
The classroom teacher would need to do that piece. Okay, all right, just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Mr. Strain?
Nothing on this.
Although, Mr. Strain, I did not mention this, but I say fondly, is there are a number of outputs and outcomes. So I would consider those outputs being those leading indicators, that what we would say is if we can hit on these outputs, then we should be seeing both some short-term, intermediate-term, and long-term outcomes. So ultimately, the judge of this will be how do we perform on our summative assessments and on other measures. But those are lagging, and I would call them outcomes. But those practice outputs would be the things that we can monitor on a quarterly or semester basis to make sure that we're looking at those things.
That's one of my biggest concerns about the grading policy that was brought forward, because those are measurements that are important, and understanding how our students are actually mastering content or not being able to master content at the rate at which we plan and they need to is really important, to your point. And when we start altering those metrics, then we lose track of where our kids are and what they need. So we'll talk more about that another time.
Ms. Shipp?
The only question I have is when you were talking about the MAPS assessment, I think it's good that, and I guess I'm going to clarify here more, that we have in place, we do the MAP assessment, how well are we looking at using that data to then improve instruction as an assessment tool? So we have the MAPS assessments, we've had it for a while. How effectively are we looking at that now being used, as I say, to move instruction?
I would say in some schools, we have best-in-class examples. But as a system, we don't have a best-in-class practice from school to school. But I think we have some schools that have been doing that readily for years, intervening and adjusting classroom instruction. But we need to ratchet up so that's universally experienced, no matter what school you're in.
Thank you.
Let's see, Dr. Jones and Ms. Cheek have both indicated they don't have clarifying questions. I have one that's similar to the clarifying question I asked Ms. Henry, which is simply that, do we have a way of measuring with each investment here how effective it is? Was that, when we're looking at this a year later, was that investment worth it? Whether we're talking about one of the programs here, whether we're talking about Orton Gillingham, just like, I want to be able to wrap my head around breaking down the effectiveness of each investment.
I'd say we would be able to look at them cumulatively, that none of them are standalone isolates. I think some things are more easy to measure themselves. I'll give you an example. So the screener in and of itself, because it screens, doesn't pretend to say then this is what the student will experience as a result of the screen. So you might be able to look at an output, what percentage of students are screened multiple times, and with Fidelity you can look at different elements of their screening, but you wouldn't say like, so as a result of their screening they're going to get better. It's what we do in response to the screening. So I would say cumulatively, and there's some specific intervention we'll be able to look at. So I don't mean to be evasive, but.
I get that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And just a time check, I was hoping to have this wrapped at 11, but this is, we can't rush through this. And so we do have probably another, 20, 30 minutes. And I know one of our sign language interpreters has to switch off. If we still have more to go at 11:30, we'll take a quick 5-minute break at that time. But we should be pretty close to done at 11:30. So on to health of the district.
Absolutely. And so last but certainly not least, I'd like to welcome Christine Pajot, our Chief Human Resources Officer, and Sean Turner, Interim Chief Operating Officer, to represent health of the district.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's always my pleasure, and especially this time around, to co-champion our Health of the District menu of strategies. And when we talk about Health of the District, I think it's important to talk about how we're really talking about investments in our people, their health and well-being, their retention, infrastructure, important other safety measures and resources so that we can ensure that we have not only complements to the learning environment, but really a direct impact to make sure that our students are learning in the best environment possible and that our people are able to focus on the core mission and vision. So first up on our menu is our modernization program. That was a multi-year project that is still going strong. It's very important to note that that program is really putting us into the 21st century when it comes to cloud computing. As you know, we currently have a lot of fragmented systems, so this is really integrating everything, and the end result is going to be a much more efficient way of doing business. And again, that directly goes to allowing our people to focus on what matters the most. Our strategy, our core mission and vision around supporting students, as opposed to dealing with broken, out-of-date, old systems that are very manually time-consuming and don't necessarily give us the data that we need to be able to progress like we would like to. So one of the things that we're looking to integrate into that system as we continue to roll it out is our background screening of our contingent or our contract workers. Currently, that is a separate standalone process, so by bringing it into the system, we're going to be able to have that in our system of record so that we can better track and make sure that we're on top of that very important compliance that goes directly to the safety of not only our students but our staff. Again, completion of the project, we are still underway. We still will need to rely on some local funding in order to be able to complete that, but the good news is that we are still within the initial estimate for the total program cost. In terms of human capital resources, the first thing on the menu is our teaching residency coordinator. We know that teaching residency is a very important and critical program in our district. It's interesting to note that more than 50% of our new teachers are alternatively certified. So it's critically important that we continue to focus in making this program a more robust one that focuses on what teachers are going to need to be prepared when they cross over from other industries. Currently, we have a teacher support coordinator that is funded by our Education Foundation. We're very grateful for that. They have continued, and they've always sponsored that program for us. And we need to continue that person in that role. This year, those funds are going to be shifted at the foundation to be able to provide more in terms of support to people who are participating in the program. So they're very much looking forward to putting in money for scholarships for those participants. And the great thing about this program and how it's connected to great teachers is it not only focuses on that quality of instruction, but also more than 65% of the members in that program and our teaching residents identify as people of color. So it's an excellent diverse strategy for diversifying our workforce and also retaining a diverse workforce. This is really necessarily tied to the next item, which is our new teacher support coordinators. CMS typically, year after year over the last several years, employs around 1,800 to 2,000 new teachers, or beginning teachers, I should say. These are teachers who have less than 3 years of experience in teaching. So we have a program in human resources that supports these individuals. Right now, however, we have 6 support coordinators funded through Title I, but they are only permitted, of course, to support Title I schools, employees that are at Title I schools. So what we're looking to do is carve out 2 additional beginning teacher support coordinators, again, for our alternatively certified teachers, since that represents such a large population of our beginning teachers. These coordinators provide things like PD, coaching, mentoring, emotional and social learning support, among other things, to make sure that they have a successful start, not only a start, but that we can successfully retain them through their course of work at CMS. Then we talk about our insourcing our substitute program. You probably are aware that we have a bifurcated system right now of managing our substitutes. So for our Title I programs, our Title I schools, our subs are staffed through Kelly Educational Services, while our CMS, the non-Title I schools, are subbed through staff who are employed directly by CMS. It's very challenging to continue in an environment where we have that type of dual system. I mean, even when you think about the basic things that come in, and we were looking at this, for example, as we returned to in-person, what our daily need was for substitutes, who was calling in. Well, our team literally has to go to one organization to try to get that data, then we pull it from our own systems, then we have to compile it, and it becomes very manual. So something even as simple as that is very challenging in this bifurcated system. But then what do we do beyond that? So it's not just about getting the data. Our question is, what do we do with the data? So being able to really analyze that and have district-wide strategies to not only increase the quality of our substitute program, to increase the fill rates and to get the schools what they need. It's also about another potential applicant pool of high-quality teachers. So we really need to be doing that type of work as opposed to just trying to just stay on top of the data. So we believe that we can do this. We know that we can do this better in-house. We already have a system in HR that is designed to be a partnership model with the schools, and this would just be another part of that partnership model. But in order to do that, we would need human capital resources as well as some system resources. For example, continuing the current substitute management system that we use to track and monitor sub-movement. And then some other small investments. Employee Relations Manager, I do want to note that on the slide deck that you received yesterday, this item, you probably have one that says workers' compensation. We went ahead and substituted that for this morning's presentation. As we go through these discussions internally, we rate things as essential, nice to have, and do not prioritize. And in reviewing the asks on the human capital side, we are really prioritizing an employee relations compliance manager over that workers' compensation ask. And really, here's why. You'll recall that a couple of years ago, we resumed a more I can say intense, rigorous background screening process within HR, and much of that work was redirected back to employee relations where it should be. So we have a team of individuals trained to look at, for example, things like criminal histories and make important determinations on whether somebody can pass a background screening. Also, and unfortunately, since the pandemic, we've had a substantial increase in things like unemployment compensation claims. We have also, we continue to, as the nature of our work, we have a lot of employees, so we have a lot of ER-type investigations that we have to continue to monitor. So much of that work was not already in employee relations and has been transitioned there. So we are in much need of a position to focus on most of those compliance matters to make sure that we not only stay on top of that, but that we can contribute more to having a health and safety, safe district for our students. Finally, employee wellness support. I led off by stating that, it's not only important that we focus, it is incredibly important that we focus on our student wellness, but that really goes in hand in hand with our staff wellness. And while we have the basic menu of options, for example, like an EAP program, we're not really positioned right now with the resources to go much beyond that. So really, this is assigning a budget to be able to create and develop and to become more innovative in that area, to be able to offer employees more options to choose from that can help enhance both their personal and professional lives. And when we talk about wellness, we're not just talking about your health, although that's critically important, but it's mental health, it's emotional health, it's financial wellness, financial literacy. So there are many things that we could do with that, but unfortunately at this moment, we haven't necessarily prioritized that. And I think given what all of us, even beyond CMS, have gone through with the pandemic, there has been much of a spotlight on this area of focus, and it's important that we recognize that and do what we can to help in that area. So I'll pass the torch to my partner.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning. I'm going to focus on the strategy 3, infrastructure, repair, and sustainability. We'll start with preventive maintenance. Many of you know that we have in excess of 23 million square feet in our district that we manage. That includes about 650 buildings, 1,400 mobile classrooms and restrooms, and about 5,000 acres. We are going to be adding an additional 400,000 square feet beginning August 2021. So this is why this funding is required, and we need a committed and consistent source of funding to ensure the sustainability of our buildings. Preventive maintenance, one of the things that we want to do is to be able to extend the useful life of our major components in our buildings to make sure that they last for the period of time that we expect them to last. We don't want them to, fail prematurely. So we need to have a good, robust preventive maintenance program in place to be able to take care of those things. Then, once we get to a point where it is actually time to make those replacements, we need a sustainment avenue to be able to fund those replacements. Many of you know that have been on the board for the last several years that in 2016, Mecklenburg County committed to providing sustainment funding for our schools. They provided $18 million for the first 4 years, and during this year, they provided $13 million. That made a significant difference in our ability to take care of our assets and to do major component replacements in our schools. So we would like to see that continue. As we continue to add additional square footage, it is important, it is vitally important that we are able to fund those types of replacements and to extend the assets as long as we can, so that, again, we don't have any premature failures. Why is this so important? We know that over time, we know that this will decrease the frequency of disruptions to the instructional program in the classrooms. That keeps our staff, the maintenance staff, from running in and out of the facility. We know that over time, again, that it will extend the useful life of the assets so that we're not doing premature replacements. And then our hope is that over time that we will see operational emergencies and things that normally come up when we're unable to take care of those assets in a way that we'd like to, that will decrease that type of response, that we'll be able to be more proactive and predictive rather than reactive. So those two categories are really important to us. We would like to see them continue, especially the sustainment, and we'd like to see the preventive maintenance portion possibly increased. In addition, the transportation maintenance facilities. Many of you may be aware that Downs Road and North Point, 2 of our 5 transportation garages, do not have a facility for our employees to provide service to the equipment, to our buses. And so often they're working out in the elements. And we just want to provide, a place for them to be able to work and to feel safe and, to come out of the elements. Like a day like today, we expect probably when we leave today that it will be raining. And when we do so, I want you to think about, we probably have technicians at those 2 sites that are working out in the elements, working on our buses. So take that into consideration. As we move on to health and safety, the first thing on the list is district-wide PPE and other supplies. During the past year, it's been quite overwhelming with all of the things that we've had to consider doing and purchasing in order to ensure safety of our students and staff. But we've been able to do it, and we've been able to provide PPE, masks, cloth coverings, disposable coverings, hand sanitizer. We've provided hand sanitizer stations. We've purchased equipment. We've purchased face shields. We've purchased a variety of things to ensure the safety of our students and our staff members. And as we begin the new year, we want to be in a position to be able to do that next year as necessary. We know that COVID is a very fluid situation. We know that, even though we have a number of people that are able to get vaccinated at this time, that we still may have a number of staff members that are not when we return in August. And so we need to think about things. We'll have people coming in and out of our schools from the community. So we want to make sure that we provision enough funds to be able to take care and purchase the items that we need to ensure the safety of students and staff ongoing. And then finally, security enhancements. I think December of 2020, Mecklenburg County voted the commissioners voted to give us an additional $4.6 million to complete some additional work with our security enhancements. One of them being the critical life cycle replacement of our camera servers. Many of you may have been aware that in 2014, when the county provided $19.3 million, we did a number of cameras or installed a number of them across the district. And now many of them are beginning to fail. As a result, we want to be in a position, as I said, to be proactive, to be able to get those replaced prior to us having any significant problems throughout the district. And so the 2020 or the 2021 money that they approved in December will replace 99 of those cameras. But we still have 64 schools where we need to replace camera servers in the district. And so we are requesting some additional funds to be able to do that. The other thing that we'd like to accomplish next year is also the replacement of exterior doors at our middle schools. Doors often are the first line of defense. And so we want to ensure that our doors are steady and that they are, they work well for the schools where, we may have issues. We want to be able to inspect those and address any that need to be replaced at that time.
Thank you, Ms. Turner. I'm going to quickly round out the last three bullets, and they're essentially a continuation of investments. So just really quickly to touch on them, the Safe Schools, I skipped one, Qualtrics symptom screening. That is the tool that we're currently using to conduct all the symptom screenings, the little mobile check-in and so forth, and some data analytics associated with that. Our Safe Schools is the platform that we use to conduct employee onboarding and to ensure that we have certain compliance forms completed, and then ongoing initial and ongoing annual training in the areas of many compliance subject matters. And then also we use it, and we've used it a lot this year in terms of providing alternative work and a platform to offer that alternative training to folks who can get online and do that training. And then finally, the State Bureau of Investigation fingerprint processing is simply a reflection of making sure that that's incorporated into our budget going forward. At one point it was not, and we had to put it back in, and we've redirected funds to be able to continue to support that, but this is officially incorporating it going forward. That's it.
So do we have any clarifying questions on what we've heard thus far? And then we're almost ready to go to the warm and the cool feedback. So clarifying questions?
Yes, ma'am, real quick. Preventive maintenance, you mentioned, and I'm contrasting this with the sustainment funding. I mean, the sustainment funding was 18 million in prior years, 13 million this year. What was the preventive maintenance fund?
So this year we received $2.8 million from Mecklenburg County. Last year we received $5 million.
Got it. Okay. I thought that was a $5 million. Thank you.
Ms. Byers-Bailey?
Yes. Are we still, now that our children are back in high school, are we doing the spot security checks including the dogs for guns, drugs?
I'm not sure about the answer to that question.
I can take that one. We have not resumed that. It's our anticipation or expectation that next school year that we would pick that back up. We understood that we have a number of challenges and opportunities this school year, and so we would look to pick that back up next school year.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. One quick question for Ms. Peugeot. In regards to the employee wellness support, you mentioned currently offering the EAP and looking to expand with emotional wellness support and financial literacy. Would you also consider expanded support, training, guidance around like equity and inclusion and anti-racism for our non-instructional staff? as part of that wellness support. And the reason I'm mentioning it is I see it, for obvious reasons. We're talking about culturally responsive teaching and the way we examine our structures and our behavioral management and all those areas. But I also realize we have so many non-instructional staff that work for you in your department, for example, who I think could really benefit, as we all can, from that type of training and engagement. And I'm just wondering if you envision that as part of your wellness support plan.
Absolutely, and that is actually music to our ears. In fact, we started to implement that program this year through the Safe Schools platform that we're seeking to continue that investment with. But we could definitely use the opportunity to expand on that as well. And as Mr. Kingsley mentioned earlier, the diversity, equity, inclusion truly is a collaborative effort and initiative that really needs to cross all aspects of what we do, and we need to be able to provide that support to employees. So yes, that was a long yes, but
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Ms. Shipp, any clarifying questions?
No, I think, Ms. Delahar, I was thinking on the lines too of staff wellness and training, and like, have you all looked at the QPR training? I don't know if that's going to be used in suicide prevention and all that we did also with staff, not just with students, but that was part of a wellness piece looked at. Is that going to be looked at again?
So that could certainly be part of it. Right now, we're working with our vendors to look at the menu of packages that they could offer us, and so that's why we built our projection around what those initial findings and the initial offerings that we were able to look at. It's a vendor that currently works with us on our other benefits packages and works with us on an open enrollment. So we are in the process of still evaluating that, but I'll definitely take a note regarding suicide prevention.
And Ms. Cheek has indicated she has no clarifying questions, and I'm not sure with Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones, if you can hear us, do you have any clarifying questions on this section? She's probably muted. I think she may be trying to drive. Okay. All right. And I know you can always follow up, or I assume you can always follow up afterwards as well. I just want to acknowledge board members for making the extra time in your busy lives for an extra workshop today. And I know there's some juggling going on. I do have a couple of clarifying questions on this part. One is, actually, it's a clarification that I might be able to make, but as far as the security enhancements and the funding from the county that was voted on in December, I believe that was not additional funding, but rather reallocated funding. So I just wanted to make that clear.
That is correct.
Am I correct in that? Okay.
That is correct.
Okay. And then do you happen to have, I know that with the sustainment funding, there's a formula that shows for every dollar spent, you save X amount of dollars. Do you happen to have that number handy?
I know that is a statement for preventive maintenance. For every $1 that you defer, you can expect to spend $4 in future expenditures.
Okay. Okay.
So, if we continue to defer, we just will increase the amount of money that we eventually have to pay for service.
Okay. All right. I assume there's also, it's the same sort of philosophy goes into the sustainment funding as if you're.
I'm sure maybe so. I will check on that. Okay. I'm not aware. The one that I just mentioned is the only one that I'm aware of, but I will certainly check on that.
Okay. Any other? Okay. So,
Madam Chair, can I respond to the sustainment and deferred maintenance? I just wanted to lift up that I did meet recently with the county manager, and while she understandably was not in a position to indicate exactly how much the county would recommit in those buckets, she did sound optimistic that they would recommit for our sustained maintenance and deferment.
that's good to hear. I mean, it's a smart investment. Mm-hmm. It's an investment, you get a return on that investment without, that's a clear one. So, thank you. So, finally, we have emerging strategies.
I
think we're ready to begin.
Oh, we're
warm and
ready
cool
for
thing-
the,
warm
okay,
and
got
cool.
it. Okay, so now, we're ready for the warm feedback and the cool feedback. So with everything you've heard thus far, now is the time to share what resonated for you, what, aligns with our goals and our strategic plan. On the other hand, what's missing, what's out of alignment. And I'll start with you, Ms. Sawyer.
Thank you. I just want to thank staff for the incredible work in laying out this plan, because I think it does align very well with our strategic plan and the needs of the district. One thing that I don't know where it fits, but it feels like it's missing, I think we have an opportunity to engage especially high school students and probably middle school students in helping us identify gaps in our cultural competencies and racial biases, and wonder if there is a way to engage students through a survey or other tools to help us identify where they see barriers and biases. That's it.
Okay. Ms. Byers-Bailey?
Yes, I was trying to keep track of my warm and cool on each page. My first comment was I heard a whole lot of PD, professional development for faculty. And I'm wondering, you can't possibly plan to get all that done before the summer. It just seemed like a voluminous amount. And it would take you years to go through all of it. And we need it all done right now because the kids need all that, what that professional development is going to produce. They need it now. And I don't know how, my cool is, I don't know how you're going to get it all done. I had 3 warms with the time thing, ISS, OSS. I'm absolutely thrilled about the fact that the kids are going to recover instructional opportunities during that process. I warm in, what was this one? This one was student wellness. I'm excited that you're going to make the effort to ID the silent sufferers, because we see the ones that are possibly losing it, but we don't see the ones who are just sitting there and sinking. And I'm excited about that. And the warm regarding a partnership model that Dr. Joe mentioned, with partnering the model of the subs that are coming in for Title I versus the subs that we have with CMS, and trying to keep track of that. I consider that a warm. That's it.
Okay. Ms. De La Hora?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you to the staff for putting this together. I can see the changes based off, or some of the changes based off of the feedback from our last budget workshop that have been integrated, and so additions and tweaks and such. So thank you so much. Just a couple quick things. I'm excited about a lot of it. I'm looking at the great teaching, thinking about our EL curriculum in particular, and I heard Mr. Kingsley talk about, relying many times when you're in with the new curriculum resources that the vendor provides, and certainly that curriculum does provide a lot of great teacher guidance and resources. It can be dense at times, and it's just an idea that I have for how we can gather maybe, and maybe this is already part of the plan and I'm just unaware, but a group of teachers to provide feedback and even enhanced sort of best practices around some of the culturally responsive teaching that we're doing, because I think that we can take it further than what's just in the teacher guidance and really give feedback on how to deliver that curriculum with the best the greatest, bang for our buck, if you will, because it's a very intentional curriculum. And I'd like to see more collaboration and best practices and maybe some investment to that end in a collaborative spirit where I think all teachers can benefit from one another. I'm jumping over to the student wellness, and very happy to see here under student support, first language, social, and emotional supports for English learners. We talked about this at the last budget meeting, and I recall someone responding to one of my questions about that we currently have 5, I can't remember if it was counselor, psychologist, positions open for bilingual staff, and just have been unable to fill them. And I don't know if this is a huge request, but just something for us to be thinking about. I know that sometimes our pay structure scales are what they are. Instead of having 5 open positions, do we have 4 and increase the pay? And I know that means an increase across the board in a supplement sort of fashion for those types of positions. But it pains me to know that we have those positions there, something for which I advocate frequently in the community, but then we just can't fill them. So some type of creativity around what can be done, and is that a specific ask that we start to look at in thinking about supplement pay in order to, I'd rather have fewer positions to get the work done than not have them at all and none of the work gets done. That's my thinking behind that. And then finally, some feedback in thinking about teacher recruitment, or just educators recruitment, I guess I should say, in human resources capital. Actually I'm wearing right now my new mask from UNCC. They've given the university has given this to the early teaching college staff and the early engineering college staff. So I know we have that program in particular, but I'm just wondering if there's a way for us to target students even in encouraging them in sort of a collaborative way to enter the education field, new innovative ways. I don't have any ideas specific to that. This is just me outside of the box thinking, but how can we encourage them beyond the early education college program to be thinking about, why a field in education would possibly be the right choice for them. So just some thoughts. Thank you.
Ms. Schiff?
Oh, let's say so much. My warm is that I really agree with the alignment and what you've done with this in terms of budget. And I've seen more with, and you can hear me say over and over about reading. That's my biggie. And I see you've looked at reading interventions. I think we still need to be looking at data-driven and what that looks like in terms of reading. But I am glad to see we talked about reading comprehension, reading interventions, and how this will go into extending the school year, quarter 5, or what we're going to call it, summer program, because I think this is going to be so critical to great teaching. When we talk about great teaching starts with reading. I just think I have to say that because reading is the core instruction that goes through everything that we do, everything that we teach. So I'm glad to see that, and that there's going to be a strong, intentional, and purposeful direction on how we close that gap, how we get students reading, and beyond 3rd grade. I think we really got to focus on that. I'm seeing that, but I think I want to see more of that, because once they leave and they're not reading at 3rd grade, they're not reading in middle school and high, what are we doing to ensure that they don't graduate without that strong emphasis on reading? When we talk about college and career readiness, we have to make sure students are reading, and reading at a literacy level so that they can be productive. And I see it, but I want to continue to hear more about that in terms of our budget. What are we doing? SEL, I have had opportunities to talk to, and I think piggybacking a little bit on Ms. Sawyer's statement, with students and staff in schools. They really feel like that SEL piece is strong. It needs to continue. Students have had conversations, even those that have returned, talking about how they feel, their social, emotional behaviors. I think this is really important. So I see we're going to continue to focus on that, and I think that's great. So that's kind of a warm for me. In terms of a cool, I think we really need to continue to look at more social workers and counselors in our school, even at the elementary level, where we don't have enough, and that is the beginning of where a lot of needs are. Social workers that have just come into even the middle schools. I was at a middle school talking to a social worker, said she was the first social worker they had at this particular middle school. I think maybe the first, just position that was a full-time social worker. So I think that this is still a critical need as we look at our budget. This is a critical need, these social workers and counselors, especially what we're looking at now. Then I want to hit on great teaching, which has been hit on some. When we talk about highly effective teachers, I think this is going to have to be in alignment with everything that we do. It is the teacher that's at the core of everything that we're talking about. So we really need to continue to work on how do we recruit. This is a big piece, which has kind of been mentioned, a greater practice for recruitment. There used to be a time we had what we call red line service. I'd like to see us really have HR analysts that are focused on recruitment at schools across this district so that that level of equity of staff is happening for effective teaching in every school. And that we look at that, because we still have schools that don't have, when we talk about the balance, they're missing the highly effective teachers. And we definitely can't master instruction and academics without it. And the teachers, I think that's where I'm going to end right there. I did want to add, I'm glad to see that we're looking at the BMT being put into schools that are greatly and highly experienced in regards to our ISS programs, because before we even had teachers that covered ISS, and that was not necessarily a very strong piece for our children that were in ISS. So I do think we need to continue with highly experienced BMTs that we hire in these schools for these programs. And I think that's it.
Before I turn to Ms. Marshall for clarifying questions, for warm and cool feedback, Ms. Kelly, I just want to do a check. I know I had said that we might need to take a break at 11:30, and that was for our sign language folks, but are they doing okay now?
She is okay now.
Okay, we're almost done, so we'll just keep plowing through. Ms. Marshall, your feedback?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think as I am processing budget, I think the thing we have to remember is what we are doing, because this is the most unusual time any of us have ever experienced. So we're going to have, but as a parent, I experienced the cliff that we fell off of in 2009, and I don't want to repeat that. However, I think we know when the cliff is coming. We will know when we get these funds what they're to be spent on, how long we have them. So we have to be very intentional, and we have to go big in some ways that right now we have an opportunity that we will never have again. So I think I'm trying to bucket this in ways that we can sustain funding and have those thoughts going forward, and then what do we need to go big on right now? And we typically don't want to go big on personnel that we can't maintain over the long term. So that's always something to think about. But right now, I'm going to say something that, for me, I think this is a go big time on some short-term bodies that we can push in through our great teaching and our academic performance to really use that small group time, use the dosing that Dr. Barnes mentioned, really be able to take this curriculum to the mat right now. So I would like us to see how we can expand the use of extra bodies for this short-term period of time to enhance that work. Because I think we've just got to really be able to understand what we're asking for of our funding partners from the state, the county, and then this federal money. So that those two things in terms of great teaching and academic, because that is core business, I think that go big mindset needs to happen there. I think that also, and I'm going to kind of combine a couple things. One thing that I've been very happy with in watching our advanced coursework is the elevation of career technical education and how that is such an on-ramp for our students. So I want to make sure that we, in terms of making kids aware of their opportunities, that continues to be elevated, and the training of our counselors, and that can even, that time that we're putting that student advisory time in, having counselors with some more face time, frankly, with a larger group of students at the same time, could be an excellent way for that to happen. I also really like the fact that we are expanding the assets that we have in terms of time of day and counselors to make all of that come together. I think that is a really good thing that doesn't cost us anything and maximizes our resources and time. So any social emotional learning, any counseling work that can happen during that period of time is a beautiful thing. I also think that we could look at packaging for our county partners the benefit that we're going to get out of restorative practices and what that is going to do for the mental health of our students, not only for their time in class, but for their mental empowerment, agency, awareness, and how that pulls into a very sustainable practice with our student wellness. I just think that really feeds on each other. And to our wellness of the district, health of the district, I think this, we didn't talk about ventilation work, and that's going to be an ongoing thing. I think we're going to need, and I had heard we may be able to use some of those dollars possibly down the road for that. So again, go take every dollar we can. I know this, I'm sitting beside the master of how to figure all of that out. So her brain is already going there, and anything we can do to that. I love the human capital resources work here. That is sustainable money, so I want to make sure that does not make us fall off the cliff. So how that ever gets packaged and talked about is really important. So I'm going to be keeping for the rest of the year my CRESA money, my whatever we're going to call the next money, what we can, how we can, again, maximize and go big in the short term, but we're going to have to understand that sometimes we may have to hire some people that we may not be able to keep forever, but this is a really important time. So I can do that knowing that's sort of what the deal is. Thank you.
That's really good. Okay, so I echo everything she just said. And first, let me just say that Rhonda Cheek is still with us remotely, and she does not have any feedback to share at this time. She may follow up with some staff afterwards. And Dr. Jones had to drop off. She was with us remotely, but she had to drop off. So as far as my feedback, everything that Ms. Marshall said. I do want to emphasize the panorama screener in my warm feedback. I do think that is potentially such a powerful tool, both for the district to wrap our heads, to understand what the trends are. I mean, what we learn from the screener will probably inform future investments at the district level. And also, it's a powerful tool if used well at the school level, and then even at the classroom level, and disaggregated. You can disaggregate the data, and my understanding is even at the parental level, this really important insight into your children. We can share this with parents, which I do think is, would have been valuable before the pandemic and is extraordinarily needed now, as I know many, many parents in our community are really wanting to understand what their kids need as we all recover from this traumatic time that we've been through. And we all want to support our kids as moms and dads and grandparents, as well as school board members. So that, lifting that up for warm feedback, I really do think it's the kind of tool that we probably could maybe do more of a deep dive on as a board, so that we understand it better, and that our community can understand it better, because I think it's a very exciting tool that we have not had in the past. One other thing that was not mentioned, and I'm not sure if this even has a budgetary impact or if it's just more of an initiative, but as far as college and career readiness, I understand that the state is putting emphasis on the importance of supporting students and families and how to complete their FAFSA forms when they're applying to college. And that's, and we actually, as far as I know, that has not been something we have been super intentional about as a district. And our FAFSA completion rates, I learned recently, are lower. They lag the rest of the state. And that would just be a real interesting, it seems as though we could really help set our students up for success, especially first-generation college students, if we can be real intentional about supporting students and families in completing FAFSA. And some of that might have to do with partners in the digital literacy space, or, helping families with computers at home or that sort of thing. But I just want to lift that up as something that was not on my radar until recently, but could be kind of a powerful and yet a very achievable way to make a difference in the lives of our students. And the last thing is, I wasn't sure if this was a clarifying question for earlier or if this was cool feedback, but I didn't hear much about our teacher leaders initiative, which I understand is expanding. And I know that within the schoolhouse, that's revenue neutral when you add a teacher leader to your staff, because the principal typically trades in another position to cover the extra pay for the teacher leader. But I know that we have coaching staff to coach the leaders, and I understand that's been funded by a grant that is phasing out. So I'm just curious if we're going to continue having coaching for all the teacher leaders, or if that's going to be absorbed into some other department. But I guess you don't have to answer it right now, but that's just something I wanted to flag, as it seems like if that is a program that is as effective as I understand it to be, then if we're expanding the number of teacher leaders, we probably need to have the capacity to support them as well, which may take some investment. And so my final feedback before we adjourn is just that I think we need to, really our board, as a governance entity, need to continue to up our game in asking the right questions and tracking how these investments are influencing student outcomes. And not getting distracted by all the other things that it's so easily to get distracted by. And so I would just like to see us really tackle that in the months ahead, especially as the stakes are raised higher than ever, as we as a community are all recovering from the pandemic, our students are, and we may have some significant infusions of short-term financial support from the federal government that could allow us to do some real game-changing work on behalf of our students. But I just feel this huge responsibility that we need to be incredibly strategic and smart with how we spend those dollars, once we find out what the dollars, what the amount is and what it can be spent for. But I just really don't want to let that opportunity go to waste. And so a lot of that is on staff, but a lot of that is on us as a board. And I'm just, before we adjourn, I am seeing a message from Ms. Cheek, and she actually does have some feedback to share. So go right ahead, Ms. Cheek.
My feedback is very brief. I thank everybody. I've been paying attention, but I had a procedure done yesterday and didn't feel like I could join in any more active way. I just want to make sure that we, stay results oriented and child oriented. And I'm very pleased with everything I'm hearing, and I'm looking forward to the next steps in this process. And that's really it. Thank you so much.
Okay. So is there anything else that you or your staff needs to add before we adjourn, Mr. Superintendent?
Madam Chair, I do not have anything in particular to add, except to say that we've captured your feedback and your questions, and we'll make sure that we follow up with responses to those clarifying questions. But thank you all for engaging again with us in this opportunity as part of this budget process.
Thank you to everyone here for your time and attention today.
Ms. Shirley, Ms. Bartles, did you all
I was
have?
just going to say thank you. I appreciate the feedback, and we've got lots of notes.
And thanks, this is really, really detailed. This is really good.
What are you
Thank
pointing
you.
at?
I did leave at the board members'
COVID funding.
seats today a summary
Oh,
of the
right,
COVID
right, right.
funding that we've
Really
received
good.
both so far. I've obviously took it from our deck that we shared in January, but put it on a 2 or 3 pager that you can take with you.
I don't know, I sort of like that massive pie chart you did.
I actually printed that
I've never seen a pie chart quite like that.
I actually put that with my copy, so that might be something I can give you a copy if you'd like to put with yours.
Fine,
I just
I've
wanna
got
say,
it
Did we
electronic.
mention teacher assistants at all just
Well,
intentionally?
I said that in my feedback, extra bodies to go deep.
Extra, and I just wanted to make
Small
sure 'cause
groups.
that we raise up that group. And that's how you reduce class sizes a lot of times with the additional bodies in the classroom. Yeah, and kind of piggybacking on, but you, Ms. Marshall, but we do need to really look at that group because they are so invaluable and we don't really sometimes give them the credit for how much they really do in that classroom. We need more.
Shout out to
I
the
did want to
teachers.
mention also about the COVID-related funding summary. You'll notice that it does not include the $140 million that I mentioned. The projected estimate is $141.9 million that's been published as far as the estimated amount for CMS. We do anticipate to get that in late spring, just to repeat, and it's not on this because it's obviously being compiled as a part of our budget. So just to make sure
And
everybody.
we don't know if we have to share that with other entities. We don't.
My understanding is that it is not subject to the same kinds of
Okay.
private school. Is that what you're talking about?
That or even
Rules.
charters or a.
This might be tough for the public to follow along
Sure.
right now, because we're not sharing those slides that you're referring to.
Okay.
So can we save that
Yes, we
question for
definitely can.
later?
Thank you. Good point.
And we'll
Okay,
definitely
I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Second.
A motion from Ms. Sawyer, second from Ms. Byers-Bailey. All in favor of the motion, let it be known by a show of hands.
You know.
And Ms. Cheek, do you vote to adjourn?
We're going to ring every
Oh, she
dollar out,
left,
baby.
okay. We are adjourned. We are adjourned.